Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, the Epstein files. They got Trump under real pressure, and nobody can save him. Before we get in there, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. The hardest working revolutionary in the business. We back with the shocking information, the Epstein files.
All right. Well, what the hell is going on? Yesterday, Trump tells Pam Bondi to release the Epstein files, or at least the parts of it that he says are credible. Watch.
But she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release.
All right. So whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Then this morning, Trump wakes up, takes a dump, gets on his phone. Well, he's probably sitting on the crapper for about an hour and a half, and he types out this thing on Truth Social. And radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again, just like with the fake and fully discredited Steele dossier, the lying 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia, blah, 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 blah. Now their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit, hook, line, and sinker.
Past supporters. So if you were a supporter and you believed what Trump had to say about getting the Epstein files out, you're a past supporter. You're out of the group. Get out.
Yeah, get out. Then today he doubled down on this when a reporter asked him in the White House. He was sitting there. With the head of who is it? I forget who the.
I can't remember.
Sorry,
I apologize.
Brain. It's one of those days. That guy. He's sitting there, and he loves to do this. He'll put on like a whole press conference with like the head of a foreign country, just like sitting there, like, oh, geez, what did I walk into? Anyway, he was asked about this by a reporter, and he said this.
Mr. President, I know you want to move past all this intrigue over the Epstein files, but I do want to ask you to clarify something you said this morning. You said this was all a hoax. Has your attorney general told you this was a hoax? What evidence have you seen?
No, it's not the attorney general. No, I know it's a hoax. It's started by Democrats. It's been run by the Democrats for 4 years. You had Christopher Wray and these characters and Comey before him.
Yeah, okay. Then the Babylon Bee tweeted this, which, as Natalie pointed out earlier in our little private text chain, this isn't even a joke.
It should be a joke, but it's not. Man who vowed to release Epstein files berates idiots for believing there are Epstein files. None of his timeline makes sense. Recall that Epstein was re-arrested under the first Trump administration after he had already gone to jail. So how is that possible? Max Blumenthal is the editor of The Gray Zone. He joins us now, and he has really put together the connections that we are not supposed to put together when it comes to Epstein and what have you. So why, Max, do you think he is doing this? And can you walk us through the connections that you put regularly on X, such as Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Epstein's visits to Israel, the things that we are not supposed to see? Thank you for going through this with us.
Well, I don't know if that's the reason why Trump is so out of step with his base. There's definitely an Israel connection there, and that may expose more, but we know so much about it. I mean, I'll answer your question directly. Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was a Mossad asset, basically had a state funeral in Israel. The Mossad director and the Israeli prime minister went to his funeral. And he was very well connected with intelligence, as well as with the French government and with the stepfather, Samuel Pissar, of Tony Blinken, who was a Secretary of State under Biden. Jeffrey Epstein had connections across both parties. He had very close pro-Israel connections, like Alan Dershowitz. He was deep in Donald Trump's world. Towards the end of his life, starting in like 2008, he became, starting later than that, I should mention, back to the Israel connection, just so I can nail down this question. Epstein had relationships with 4 Israeli prime ministers. He was very close to Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was visiting his place dozens of times. Everyone watching this has probably seen the photo of Ehud Barak trying to slip into Epstein's townhouse with his face covered. He knew Shimon Peres, former Israeli prime minister. He also knew Ehud Olmert. These are all from the labor side, but he also was able.
Revolutionary salute to my brother Roscoe for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is where life is. A salute, King. Salute to you, brother. I appreciate you helping me keep the lights on in the House of Revolution. Salute.
To arrange meetings for JP Morgan executives with Netanyahu, which they were really seeking out after Netanyahu became prime minister in 2009. So that's 4 prime ministers. Do we know if Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent? I don't know. He had multiple passports. He went to Israel in 2008 after he was afraid he would be convicted for trafficking in the United States or soliciting prostitution. He also was seeking passports not only to travel through Israel, but also to Africa. I believe some kind of Saudi ID was found in his home after he died. And we don't really know about all the contents of his safe and other things that were found in his home, but there may be a much more mundane explanation for all this, which is that Donald Trump fears deep structural political damage if he releases any more information or allows this to continue because of his deep, long-standing, abiding relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And Steve Bannon, also his former chief of staff, was close friends with Jeffrey Epstein, recorded over 15 hours of footage interviewing Epstein in his home, and has never released it. He never even released the 2021 documentary he was producing. Howard Lutnick, who was on the Commerce Secretary, who was on the tarmac with Donald Trump when Trump was basically spitting on his own base and calling them all crazy conspiracy theorists. Howard Lutnick shared a wall with Jeffrey Epstein's townhome, bought his own townhouse from a company, a holding company set up by Epstein and his business partner, Les Wexner. So these connections are abundant, and I think Trump may have just very personal reasons for not wanting to release any more info.
I mean, does he have the power to do that, to just not release this? I mean, Congress, you saw that motion by Thomas Massey yesterday, Congressman Massey pushing forth to solidify this and to try to get Congress on the record about this and release that. Roger Stone coming out saying there's one way to do this, which is under the Trump administration in the Southern District of New York, under the former Trump administration in 2019, just release that indictment, release everything that was, related to all of that, and stop calling us all idiots. Stop calling us all morons for wanting these files released.
Jeffrey Epstein died on Trump's watch after being visited in prison by then Attorney General and former CIA agent Bill Barr, who wrote all the pardons back in the day for the Iran-Contra felons. He's sort of a cover-up man. So there was not really much hunger in the first Trump administration to get any of this out. Then you have the Biden administration come into power. They didn't bring up Epstein when it clearly could have hurt Trump during the campaign. Kamala Harris didn't have any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Why didn't she bring this up? And why didn't Biden's very weaponized, very politicized FBI under the watch of and DOJ Director Merrick Garland seek to release anything? Well, maybe there was nothing there, or maybe the Democrats were also compromised because Bill Clinton was still a towering figure in the Democratic Party, along with so many others in the Democratic Party who had known Jeffrey Epstein. But now what you can see the Democrats doing, and if I'd been an advisor to Kamala, I would have told her the only way you could possibly win, because you're one of the worst candidates since, I don't know, Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, is to bring up Epstein again and again, because it will demoralize Trump's base and break his mystique. What I would have done, if I were them, was to bring it up constantly. But we're at a different point now where the Clintons don't have the same hold over the party. Barack Obama's a faded figure. Like the past is kind of gone. But Biden's like staring at a wall right now, drooling. And so you have a younger generation of Democrats who have figured out that this is the Achilles heel of Donald Trump. And so Ro Khanna, who wants to be the future of the party and kind of be the meeting point between the Bernie Sanders movement and the kind of Obama centrists, he is pushing this very
revolutionary salute to our brother Leonard. Watched him for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is real life. You say dinner time, you're absolutely right. Roll up that good dinner, man. Appreciate you helping me keep the lights on here in the House of Revolution. Salute.
Very hard
that time.
in the House, and Thomas Massie, who is being targeted by Donald Trump, is joining him to introduce a resolution to call for the full release of the Epstein files. So this is sort of a generational thing, because the Epstein generation is dying and you have a young generation at the base, Donald Trump's base. I wouldn't even really call them Republicans. They're sort of like right-wing America First that is in sort of full revolt against Donald Trump, and they want a new generation of leadership. So this is not going to go away. And finally, this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein has become a proxy or a catch-all for all of Trump's betrayals of his base on Ukraine, where he's now rearming Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia, bombing Iran. The anti-immigrant part of his base is mad that he's going to do a potential amnesty for undocumented hotel workers. There's so many betrayals, and Epstein just kind of crystallizes it all.
Inflation is still rising, no matter what the government says, and we are all feeling it. Gas is higher, home repairs. If you're a homeowner, you probably thought, well, maybe well for him in the past. So this branding of Epstein hoax, it does feel to me like he thinks that this will do it. And as soon as you slap this crazy person label on it, then, there's no more. But the mainstream media, it's so funny, is not fighting him. And so we see here it at play, a uniparty, people trying to protect themselves. And so it does feel very much like there's this older generation that needs to be protected. But do you think that there's anybody new, like any of the up and comers who may be compromised by anything like this? Or is it just like, you have to be under 60 to want this?
I was on the Hill yesterday. I went to a meeting of the Republican Study Group, which is 70 Republican members of Congress. And they were setting up meetings with new media in a big room in the Cannon House office building, because these are like backbenchers who want publicity. And so I kind of swooped in there and started asking them all about the Epstein files. And most of them were just falling into line with Trump because they have to, because it was Trump's movement and Trump's money and political muscle that put them in power, and he can take them out. Look at what he's trying to do to Thomas Massie, teaming up with AIPAC to take out one of the favorite members of America First because he hasn't fallen into line with Trump. He's too independent. So they're all afraid of Trump. Trump thinks that his base is a cult, and they have behaved like one, partly because of weaponized investigations that were fake, like the Russiagate hoax. Trump has said that if I stood in the middle of Fifth Ave in New York and shot a man, they would all still support me. The problem is that he was seen as a sort of victim hero in the past, but then he and his influencers, like FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, when he was an astroturfed radio host, were promising this giant drop of the Epstein files, which sort of capitalized off the narrative in the first Trump administration, started by like influencers, like lesser known figures like Ron Watkins, who started the QAnon concept that Trump was going to take down the pedophile elite blackmail rings. And so there was this expectation that Trump would actually take on the deep state, and that releasing the Epstein files would be the ultimate takedown. Then it turns out Donald Trump is compromised. There are photos, there's video of him and Jeffrey Epstein hanging out with Buffalo Bills cheerleaders who are grinding all over Trump, and Trump's joking about them. And so it starts to seem like actually they've been had, they've been took, they've been hoodwinked and bamboozled by this guy who's one of them. And I don't know. I mean, I think you have to be a massive dupe to not realize that this was always the case with Trump, but they were tricked by all these influencers. And now where's Dan Bongino? Where is he? He's hiding in Florida. He might quit the FBI. I don't know. He had a huge screaming match with Pam Bondi, who's the Trump loyalist attorney general. And the crack up is just beginning. I think the Democrats are going to take this Epstein ball and run with it. And that will be the only thing Trump will have. Well, he'll say, well, the Democrats are trying to exploit this Epstein hoax, this Epstein conspiracy theory. So you have to line up with me. Otherwise, they're going to fill up your daughter's locker room with trans males or something. And he'll take it back to the culture war.
I mean, it's so disturbing. Yeah, I don't know if the strategy is going to work where he calls us all retarded for wanting the release of the Epstein files. You know, that's basically what he's doing. He's like, oh, last week we were all in favor of getting the Epstein files out. I stood up here at the podium and told you we're going to do it, full transparency, and now you're all retarded.
Right. But I think that, you know, most of us were really keen on getting Democrats out of office because the Biden years were hell. But we knew that Trump had not done a lot of swamp draining during his first administration. We thought we'd get maybe small measures of something. This is really This is beyond insulting for anyone who had any kind of hope that small measures, which it feels like a poison pill, don't you think?
It was a poison pill that Donald Trump injected into the veins of his base by making these promises. I mean, that's the difference between this and the Russiagate hoax, is that Trump tried to own this, or his people tried to own it, and it worked very well, along with the Hunter Biden laptop, which was real, in poisoning the Democrats in their eyes. The problem is Jeffrey Epstein was a sort of a bipartisan operation. He compromised everybody who touched him. And, you know, I should say that I come from the left. I'm not a Republican. I did not support Donald Trump, but I didn't support Biden or Hillary or Obama either. The reason that I couldn't support the Democrats is I don't support the status quo. And the Democrats and their donor base, and a large part of their base in general, just generally supports the status quo in the United States. And what Trump successfully did was he peeled off all these different groups that opposed the status quo for various reasons, including Rust Belt voters who were abandoned during the years of globalization under Clinton. He peeled off Iraq war veterans who felt abandoned and hated John McCain, and on and on. I never really came along, but now you have Trump owning the part of the American electorate, or a large part of it, that opposes the status quo, doesn't trust the elites, hates the establishment, and now they're identifying him with Jeffrey Epstein and starting to see that there's this actual cover-up of Trump's relationship with one of the most odious figures sitting at the center of the world of reptilian shapeshifter, Davos hovercraft elite sex perverts. And that's a big problem. They're not, and the only thing Trump has, though, is that in the US, there's no choice. Like, what was my choice in the last election? My choice was to vote for either these two or to vote for Jill Stein. And, you know, I helped her get to like 0.9%. So there's no vehicle for anyone who's disgusted with Donald Trump within his base right now. And at the end of the day, in 2026 or 2028, he's just going to say, he's going to just bring up a bunch of culture war issues, as the Democrats do, and expect his base to fall in line.
Yeah, a lot of them are. Max Blumenthal, great to see you as
Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another Legally Armed
Salute, family.
America video. I'm, of course, Paul Glasgow here, the one and only Truth Pimp, dealing you a very vulgar display of logic and reason. And today, I know I say this a lot in my videos, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose some of you today. And I'm okay with that. I'm not saying that to be provocative. I'm saying that because I actually want to provide you an easy way out. I don't want you to have to struggle. I'm actually going to show you the YouTube channel that you are likely watching this on that belongs to me. I'm also going to show you how to unsubscribe from my channel if your feelings get hurt because of this video today. Because I'm that nice of a guy. Where you see the blue circle right here, simply uncheck the subscribe button if it says already subscribed or subscribed. Just check it again or click it again and it will unsubscribe you from my channel and you won't be bothered with my views anymore. Why do I say all this? Because I'm not anybody's bitch. And many of you out there aren't either. Let me make something very clear. I am prepared to lose every single one of my followers on this channel because I refuse to be any human being, any man's bitch. I don't bow down to any man. There's not one person that I look at that I idolize so much that I would let them shit on me no matter what. I'm not letting this man shit on me. I still have my own principles and my own opinions, and I will stick to them. I can still support Trump's policies. I can still support what he's doing because he's doing some wonderful things in this government. This is something I will not let him shame me out of. Quite frankly, I'm shocked, even though it's a super small number, I'm shocked at how many people are letting Trump talk to you like you're his bitch, because that's what he's doing. I voted for Trump 3 times. And if he clears this mess up, would vote for him a 4th time, even though constitutionally he can't. I get all that. But I voted for him for 3 times. And I support 99.99% of his policies. But it's okay to not support 1 or 2 things that he says or does. And I find myself at a crossroads here with some of you out there, not many, believe me, there ain't many of you, but some of you who think that Trump can do no wrong. It doesn't matter how stupid of a thing he says. It's not possible to criticize him because Trump is the God. You want to wash his feet. It's the craziest thing. I don't know that I've ever seen this before with somebody who wasn't like a movie star, rock star, or something like that. It blows me away, quite frankly. And it actually saddens me to know that people are that weak-minded that they would fall for things like this. This is all on the heels of Trump putting out today, I shouldn't say shaming, trying to shame people who have supported him for 12 years, right? All the way through when he announced, or I say 12 years, you do the math, for however long since he has been running for president, 3 different terms, right? Trump put out the radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again. Just like with the fake and fully discredited Steele dossier, the lying 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia. No, it came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. And even the Russia scam itself, a totally fake and made up story used in order to hide crooked Hillary Clinton's big loss in the 2016 presidential election. These scams are hoaxes and are all the Democrats are good at. Now, up to there, he's right. It's all they have. They are no good at governing, no good at policy, and no good at picking winning candidates. This is where he dives down into the cesspool that is Washington, D.C. Also, unlike Republicans, they stick together like glue. Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned. He's talking about us, by the way. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. I've had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history, and all these people want to talk about, with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems, is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings talking about us continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anymore. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. Before I address the contents of that stupid post, I want to take you through a really short history. 2016 campaign. Trump had alluded to the scandals of the Epstein issue early on, targeting Bill and Hillary Clinton, tying into this narrative of establishment corruption, using them as the bait, basically, with Epstein and Clinton. In a February 2015 CPAC speech, Trump said of Bill Clinton, quote, "He's got a lot of problems coming up, in my opinion, with the famous island with Jeffrey Epstein." This referenced Epstein's private island, Little St. James, amid emerging abuse allegations. October 2015 on Fox News, Hannity, Trump described Epstein's island as a cesspool and suggested asking Prince Andrew about it, indirectly linking it to Clinton without naming him. 2020 campaign. References intensified after Epstein's 2019 arrest and death in federal custody during Trump's term. In August 2019, Trump retweeted implying the Clintons' involvement in Epstein's death, aligning with his, quote, deep state attacks during the 2020 re-election push. There were other times on the campaign trail he said just as much. 2024 campaign. Trump promised transparency on files as part of his pledge to declassify documents on JFK, 9/11, and other topics. Again, this included the Epstein files. When asked if he'd declassify Epstein's files, Trump replied, quote, "Yeah, I would. I guess I would. I think that less so because you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if there's phony stuff in there, because it's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would. Certainly about the way he died. It'd be interesting to find out what happened there, because that was a weird situation and the cameras didn't happen to be working, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'd go a long way toward that one." So from 2016 up until 2024, and actually probably into 2025, to be truthful, Donald Trump felt the exact same way we did about the Epstein case. So as I stated, I won't let someone shame me out of something because they changed their mind. They changed their mind, meaning Trump and whoever else, whoever his handlers are. Somebody has either convinced him or he saw something that made him change his mind. Until I see that thing, I ain't changing mine. Maybe it's perfectly reasonable. Maybe he saw something that tells him exactly what he's telling us, but he ain't showing us that. He saw whatever that was, but he's sure not sharing it. So if Trump was repeating all this stuff about Epstein, and now he's shaming us about the same stuff that he was repeating from 2016 to 2024, let me go back and look at his little Truth Social post, where he says that his past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. Then that means Trump bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. Because what he's trying to shame you about right here is the same stuff you believed and that he believed up until what, this month, last month? So Trump bought it, hook, line, and sinker. So shame on Trump for falling for that too. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. Well, apparently Donald J. Trump was also conned by the lunatic left up until last month, because he obviously fell for the bullshit hook, line, and sinker. So he was conned as well. So Trump's actually describing himself along with us as being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. Goes on to say, and all these people want to talk about with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems is a Jeffrey Epstein hoax. First of all, that's not all we want to talk about. See, we're not stupid. We're actually some pretty intelligent people. And we don't just talk about this. Check my police record. Go back and look at my videos. I'm not just talking about Epstein. I go look at all my social media posts. Jeffrey Epstein is a small portion of things I've talked about. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I know people hate that cliche, but it's an absolute fact. Stating that that's all we're talking about is just generalizing, and it's stupid. Again, it's trying to shame somebody by going, okay, sorry, Donald Trump. But it ain't working here, son. If we were prodded by the fake news and success star of Dems, then so were you. Because again, 2016 to 2024, or at least up until last month, Donald J. Trump thought just like I did about these exact same things. And finally, supposedly we are doing the Democrats' work. So it looks like from 2016 to 2024, Donald J. Trump was doing the Democrats' work. Because again, he was saying the same things back then that all of us were. Bottom line is, Donald Trump changed his mind. We did not. My principles do not change overnight because some guy who can't show me the proof tells me I should think differently. I'm not thinking differently. Show me and I might. But by telling me that I'm stupid and that because I believe the same things that you did and you changed your mind now, that I'm the stupid one, doesn't work to me, son.
Administration's extremely controversial treatment of the Epstein files, which was central to the discourse of right-wing and MAGA politics over the last 4 years. And the Trump administration shocked and angered, especially their own followers, when out of the blue, they sent a memo to Axios, of all places, announcing that the DOJ and FBI had concluded their investigation. There was nothing here to see at all. They were closing the investigation and they would release no further documents, meaning they wouldn't have released a single document, not even one token one, that wasn't previously available. And we reported on and showed you the video where Trump at the White House, when asked about the one issue they've never addressed, which is Epstein working with a foreign intelligence agency, they asked it to Pam Bondi, and before she could answer, he wouldn't let her answer. He interjected and said, "How dare you talk about something so trivial? Move on. We have way more important things to talk about than some weird creep who died 5 years ago." Oh yeah, this is totally irrelevant. But his most prominent supporters, and huge millions of them, were feeding for the last 4 years on the claim that this was not just relevant and important, but essential to understanding the rot at the heart of the globalist order, and that the Biden administration had in its possession enormous amounts of documents extremely incriminating about many of the world's most powerful people that they were concealing to protect the world's most powerful predators. And Trump officials who now run the FBI and DOJ and other agencies came into office campaigning on a promise, as did J.D. Vance and even Donald Trump, to finally bring transparency to this. And so to just tell them all of a sudden, oh, this thing that you've been talking about for 4 years that your most trusted pundits and journalists have been telling you is so vital, that we've been saying is so vital. J.D. Vance made a huge deal out of it. Donald Trump Jr. did. Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, long list. Everything they've been telling you about how crucial this is, the documents are so incriminating, the Biden administration is disgracefully hiding it. Never mind, forget all that. This is not even relevant. Who cares about Jeffrey Epstein? People other than the most drooling, subservient, partisan supporters of Trump are not going to accept that, and they haven't. And as a result, Trump keeps having to go back to it, even though he said, I'm not talking about this anymore. Don't ask me about it. It's too insignificant. His base is riled up over this. It's become a very significant controversy, arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of the Trump administration thus far. And it's kind of a Frankenstein that they created by spending so many years banging the table saying only corrupt protectors of pedophiles like the Biden officials would hide these documents. And now they're hiding them, even denying in some senses that they exist. And so Trump has repeatedly gone back. He keeps making it worse. And now he has spun this incredibly nonsensical conspiracy theory that it's the Democrats who created the Epstein files, who forged them, who fabricated them. And that as a result, he says, anybody demanding release of the Epstein files, something that he promised to do, that J.D. Vance promised to do, that all these people promised to do, that anyone demanding that is a selfish person playing into the hands of the radical left by demanding the disclosure of documents that he says were faked, like the Russiagate investigation was, by all these Democrats. Clearly eager to convince the public, you don't need to see these documents, and even if you did, the things in them, don't believe them, they're fake. Why would Trump be so incentivized to convince the public that the information contained in the Epstein files, which first the Trump administration summarily announced they were going to conceal, why would he be so interested in convincing them that they're fake? What's in those documents that he wants the public to disbelieve? Here he is speaking up outside the White House, standing next to his press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, earlier today.
On Epstein, the Attorney General briefed you on the DOJ and FBI review, the findings of that review. The Attorney General briefed you on
what? On the
DOJ and FBI review. On Epstein, of the review of the files. Attorney General Pam
a very quick briefing.
Did she tell you, what did she say about the review? And specifically, did she tell you that her name appeared in the file?
No, she's...
So the question was, in case you didn't hear, there were a lot of noise going on. It's outside the White House. Did Pam Bondi give you a briefing on what's in these documents? And did she happen to mention whether your name appears in any of the documents? And here's what Trump said.
No, she's given us just a very quick briefing, and in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. And I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden, we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Yeah.
Now, that is a little bit of a shift rhetorically, because the FBI and DOJ's announcement originally was, we're closing the investigation. There's no further disclosures. And when Trump was asked about it at the White House, he said, this is just leave me alone. I don't want to hear about this. This is too irrelevant. Pam Bondi answered the question about whether Epstein worked for a foreign intelligence agency by saying, I don't know. I have no knowledge about it. I never thought about that before. We'll get back to you. Now he's saying she's going to release credible information, which means that there's some documents that Trump regards as non-credible, faked by Obama. And when did, by the way, Obama fake these documents? Jeffrey Epstein was arrested during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. And that's when he supposedly killed himself in 2018. So the origin of this investigation would have been under Donald Trump. How did Obama fabricate documents in the Epstein file, and to what end?
Because people
if
don't
Jim
like
Comey
Obama
and John Brennan and Obama and Hillary had fabricated documents, altered these documents, and asserted stuff about, I don't know, about Trump or his associates, why would they do that if they didn't release it? It only makes sense to do that if you're then going to release it and say, oh, look, here's the Epstein files, here's Trump's name, or here's Mitch McConnell's name, or whatever. And then Trump would say, no, those are forged. Why would the Democrats forge documents and leave them there, not release them? How does that make any sense? When could they have forged them? When did Hillary and Jim Comey and Brennan have the ability to access the Epstein files.
Just saying anything.
And what's the basis for this? Why is this only being claimed now? Why is Trump so eager to convince his base and the public, look, there's documents in there that you don't need to see? Not the ones about Epstein having sex with kids on video or the child pornography they say he downloaded. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody cares about that. Nobody's asking for that. And this isn't something that Trump just came up with today. This is clearly a conspiracy theory he's decided to disseminate. Here on Truth Social, after he told everybody to move on, not talk about it anymore, and his supporters continued to do it anyway for the reasons I said, he went on Truth Social and said this, quote, "What's going on with my boys, and in some cases gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's doing a fantastic job. We're all on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to hurt it all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it's Epstein over and over again." So he called the people who are asking for disclosure of the Epstein files selfish. And then this is what he said. You see the part in blue right here. This is amazing. This is that same conspiracy theory that he enunciated today. Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, crooked Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration, who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, and more? They created the Epstein files. Just like they created the fake Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele dossier that they used on me, and now my so-called friends are playing right into their hands. Now, is anyone who's a Trump supporter going to believe this? That after spending 4 years saying the Epstein files hold the key to everything, accusing the Biden administration of protecting pedophiles by refusing to release it, they're now going to believe that, oh, these documents were written by, he says the files were, they created the Epstein files, meaning Hillary and Obama. Does anyone believe this? Trump seems very eager to me to say, we're not going to release certain files because some of it contains information that's false. What information is that he's so eager to convince Americans were fabricated by Obama and Hillary and Biden? That didn't come from nowhere. He's very interested in making sure that people believe that. I don't think he's going to get very far. Here's the first polling data on what Trump is doing with Epstein. It's from Morning Consult. And it came out today, and the headline is few Americans trust the DOJ's conclusions on Jeffrey Epstein. And then here you see the two questions they asked. The percentage of voters who believe the Justice Department is being honest and transparent by saying, first, there's no evidence of a client list or blackmail scheme involving Epstein and prominent people. And here you see in blue, this is the percentage of Americans who believe the Justice Department's claim on that. Only 25% of voters overall. And amazingly, the group that most believes what the Justice Department says, there's no client list, there's no evidence of blackmail, are Republicans. If you had taken this poll a year earlier, 6 months earlier, Republicans were the ones saying, no, there's huge amounts of incriminating evidence there that the Biden administration is hiding. Now suddenly it's Republicans who believe the Justice Department's claim. But note, this is the no, the pink here. More Republicans disbelieve the Justice Department than believe it. There's the Trump Justice Department, and 41% of Republicans say they don't believe the Justice Department when they say there's no evidence of a client list or blackmail scheme involving Epstein and prominent people. Only 35% believe it. But look at independents. 54% of independents say they do not believe the Justice Department is being honest. Only 18% say they believe the Trump Justice Department. And Democrats, 60% say they don't believe the Trump Justice Department. Only 20% say they believe the Trump Justice Department. And overall, the breakdown is 51% of all Americans say no, they don't believe the Trump administration's claims about this, and only 25% believe it. They ask the same question, do you trust the Justice Department when they say that Epstein committed suicide in prison? in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Again, it's Republicans who now, amazingly, it's Republicans who most believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. 40% of them believe the Justice Department is being honest about that. Only 37% believe they're not. But overall, 35% of voters believe when the Justice Department says Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. 42% believe they're not being honest. So you see already a lot of Republicans have shifted to the point where Republicans are now the ones who are most dismissive of the Epstein files. Nothing to see, he killed himself, move on. But still, huge numbers of people do not believe the Justice Department on this. And why would they? They've heard for years and years and years the opposite of this. Here's data for Progress. Polling on Trump's handling of the Epstein files. Republicans who have heard a lot about the Epstein files disapprove of the Trump administration's handling of them. So of the Republicans who have heard a lot about what Trump administration is saying, huge numbers don't believe it. So here's the top list. People who say they've heard a lot about the Epstein files. And the question is, do you approve or disapprove of how the Trump administration has handled the release of these files? Only 20% of Republicans say they approve. 20% said they somewhat approve. 36% say they strongly disagree, and 19% say they somewhat disapprove. So even just among Republicans who have heard a lot about the Epstein files, 55% disapprove of how the Trump administration has handled this, compared to only 40% who approve. That's Republicans. Now, that's really bad news, not just for this specific issue, but for the broader promise of the Trump administration that they were going to cleanse the government of what was, in fact, these frauds that the Biden administration perpetrated on Russiagate, which was really Obama, but his CIA, and lying about the Hunter Biden laptop files being Russian disinformation, about the Steele dossier, about COVID. People have come to distrust the government, and it's a major reason why they turned to Trump, who vowed to provide all this transparency, to be honest with the public about what's happening, regardless of where the chips might fall. And when the public says, including Republicans, we don't believe Trump and the Justice Department and what they're saying about Jeffrey Epstein, it's not just about Jeffrey Epstein, it's about the loss of trust that the Trump administration had about whether they would be any different or they would just be the same old, as the entire DC political class constantly lies and deceives and covers up. And once people think that about you, and this is an issue that they heard a lot about, not from the New York Times and NBC News, but from Trump world over the last 4 years, once that trust is gone, it is extremely difficult to get back. It's like if someone in your life who you trust, you catch them lying about something really important. That trust is fractured, if not broken. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for that person to earn it back because you've proven you're willing to lie about something important. Why wouldn't you again? That's what's happening with the Trump administration. And the fact that Donald Trump is now resorting to this utterly insane, deranged conspiracy theory that I don't think anyone's going to believe, that it was the Democrats that created the Epstein files, as he said verbatim, and that a lot of the information there is fake and they fabricated it, leaves a lot of people wondering why Trump is suddenly so interested in convincing the public not to believe the Epstein files, even if they do one day get disclosed through whatever mechanism the public comes to learn about them. If you're still tossing and turning all night and feeling edgy during the day, which I know a lot of people are, a lot of that.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Andre Tony for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
The day has finally come when I truthed a little bit too hard and the powers that be has laid their hammer down onto me. I woke up this morning to this notification on my TikTok informing me that my account was banned for violating community guidelines, and then I was instantly logged out. Now, keep in mind, my account was in good standing before this, so this definitely doesn't have anything to do with what I was saying and everything to do with who I was talking about. So let's get into it today. Is Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, caught up in an Israeli honeypot operation? Oh yeah, it's not going to be that easy to silence us. In fact, we're going even harder today. So you've probably heard by now, the Department of Justice has officially closed the book on Jeffrey Epstein. There's apparently no client list, no blackmail operation, nothing to see. Ghislaine Maxwell, she's just serving a 20-year sentence for absolutely no reason. And Jeffrey Epstein self-checked out right before trial that had apparently no evidence. Yeah, nobody's buying it. So the question here is, how could this be happening? So over the last couple days, the attention has turned to FBI Director Kash Patel, specifically his much younger girlfriend, Alexis Wilkins, with some social media users wondering whether the FBI and the U.S. Justice Department's refusal to release the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients could have something to do with one Alexis Wilkins, the 26-year-old girlfriend of the 45-year-old FBI Director Kash Patel. Because remember, just to jog everybody's memory, here is what Kash Patel was publicly saying about the Epstein files just a few years ago.
You know, it's the same thing with Epstein's list. It's like, what the hell are these Republicans doing?
Oh, I saw you
give out the list.
I saw you make news this morning about that. I got to get to that.
Yeah.
You say that the FBI has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. That doesn't seem like something you should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list. You don't think that Bill Gates is lobbying Congress night and day to prevent the disclosure of that list?
Funny the timing. 2023, Kash wanted the list out, and now it's 2025. He's the director. Suddenly the list is non-existent. Now, the elephant in the room is, of course, who might be on that list. We know some of the most powerful people in the country up to the president of the United States, past and current. But even beyond that, it's basically undeniable at this point that this so-called list is all about intelligence, specifically Epstein's ties to a certain foreign intelligence.
As part of our investigation, we spoke to Ari Ben-Mashani, who is a former Israeli spy. He said on the record unequivocally that Jeffrey Epstein was working for Israeli intelligence operations, the Mossad, and running a classic honey trap operation.
And this is where Alexis Wilkins comes into the story when she starts dating Kash Patel back in 2023. People online have been pointing to the fact that Alexis Wilkins works for PragerU, a media company that supposedly espouses American values, except for the fact that it is run by, and I can't even make this stuff up, a former Israeli intelligence officer serving in Unit 8200 of the IDF, which is akin to what the NSA would be here in the United States. Now, I did a bunch of digging, and, coincidence or not, there's actually not a lot to go off of in terms of public information about Alexis Wilkins' background. What we do know for sure is that her father worked for Gillette and that her mother was in aerospace and pharmaceuticals. They lived in England and Switzerland before settling down in Fayetteville, Arkansas when Alexis was 9. And we also know that she attended Collège du Léman International School in Switzerland. That's pretty much it. Now, interestingly, ChatGPT is calling this a strange biographical gap, and it's citing that because she has no visible friend network or public high school/college cohort interviews, that this is sort of unusual for a public figure in entertainment, and that if, quote, a Mossad asset were inserted early in life, these gaps would be precisely where you'd hide alternate history or handler training. Dr. Simon Goddick posted on Twitter saying, quote, Alexis Wilkins is nearly 20 years younger than Kash and works for an NGO that's basically Israeli intelligence. He's talking about PragerU there. And seriously, why would an attractive young woman date a not so attractive Indian American? classic honeypot. I mean, who are we to really judge who people are attracted to and who they're not attracted to? I mean, is this a honeypot, or are they just madly in love? Only they would know the truth. And maybe this is just all one big coincidence. But what I will say is that whether or not this is a conspiracy, the outcome is the same. That powerful people are once again getting away with the most heinous crimes imaginable. And people like me, who are just out here asking questions, trying to hold people accountable, we're silenced. But for what it's worth, I'll leave you with ChatGPT's conclusion, pointing to Wilkins being a country singer, PragerU contributor, conservative speechwriter, and 19 years younger than Mattel, positing, quote, "These are classic elements used in honeypot operations: soft power, ideological alignment, and sexual emotional entanglement." My name is James Lee. I want to know what you think. Is our government compromised at the highest level? Drop a comment below.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Look. The government's not going to do anything about the Epstein elite. They're just not. So what we're going to do over the next however many parts is to discuss the Epstein elite. Now, probably 5 or 6 years ago, when he was in prison, I was talking about some of these elite over the course of several episodes of the podcast, but I think it's a good idea to be reminded of who these elite are and their connections to everybody else, and why the government's not doing anything. Why we're just saying, you know what, we're not going to bring any of these people to justice. So let's start with one. Well, actually, before I start with one, let me tell you this. We're going to go through some of the people in the Black Book, right? But here's the thing about the Black Book. I'm not going to be talking about ones where it's just like name and then perhaps like one phone number or something like that. You know, that's somebody like Epstein maybe just got their business card and put it in there. I'm talking about the people that have 5 or 6 contacts in there. The ones that Epstein like crossed out with a line and put in new phone numbers. Somebody's got like 10 or 12. You know that he was up to his eyeballs with them. But let's talk about Woody Allen first. Might as well. You know, Jeffrey Epstein kept a photo of Woody Allen on his wall and was photographed walking with him on the Upper East Side. They had more than a neighborhood in common, and a lot of people don't know this. We know that Woody Allen is a predator, right? But, for years before his relationship with Mia Farrow, Woody Allen had carried on with a 16-year-old girl he'd met at Elaine's named Bobby Christina Englehart. Bobby spelled B-A-B-I. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she wondered if she was the inspiration for Manhattan. Now, if you've never seen Manhattan, it's a 1979 movie with Woody Allen about a man in his 40s who dates a high school student and was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. Now, Englehart had sex with Allen more than 100 times, sometimes with Mia Farrow. And she said the whole thing was a game that was being operated solely by Woody, so we never quite knew where we stood. But the crazy thing about this is that Englehart went on to become Epstein's assistant. Yes. Crazy, right? I know. Jeremy Marsh. Okay. This is he leads like this investment banking firm. He's from England, but the investment banking firm's in India, linked to the Paradise Papers, former Players Top 20 Limited with Simon Richard Binns, worked with the British recorded music industry, and also with Edgar Bronfman over at Warner Brothers Music. Edgar Bronfman, of course, you know, his sister's involved in Nexium. Okay. Then we had Bob Oatman. He's a protection and security expert, the author of The Art of Executive Protection, How to Live, Work, and Travel Safely in This Dangerous World. Epstein's got like 20 contacts for this guy, 20 of them. It's crazy. There's a guy named Joe Pagano. Look at this one. This guy does psychology research, vital info behind investments, insider trading, stocks, finance. This guy was thick with Jeffrey Epstein. Very much. And Joe Pagano Jr. is over the Essence Foundation. Just some really, really shady people. Thick as thieves. Goes back with Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein. Goes back to the beginning of Bear Stearns, back when Jeffrey Epstein did that. Lisa Phillips, she was a Ford Models model scout. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into like the Jacques Brunel kind of thing with the whole models and stuff, but anytime you see any of these modeling agencies, and Ford Models kind of legit, but Lisa Phillips did Mugshot Talent Management Agency. It was mugshotmanagement.com and YouTube and stuff like that. And what they were doing is they were always looking for fresh faces. And then she wanted emails and stuff like that. And this somebody had 14 entries in Jeffrey Epstein's black book. Michael Ovitz. Oh, Michael Ovitz. About 20 entries in Jeffrey Epstein's black book. He was a consultant of Virgin Drinks Company. Virgin Drinks was a subsidiary of the Virgin Group owned by Richard Branson, who's also in the book. It marketed Virgin Cola and Virgin Vodka. And Richard Branson doesn't know how he got in the book. Really? And Michael Ovitz, huge relationships with the Bronfman family. And Ovitz was in a 50-50 partnership with Richard Branson and Virgin Group. Now, Steve Bannon ran a talent company with Jeff Quatnitz called The Firm. And The Firm went on to purchase Michael Ovitz's artist management group back in 2002. And Bannon and Quatnitz were strategic bankers. And they helped negotiate the purchase of Warner Music from Time Warner. And during this time, Edgar Bronfman, again, the sisters in Nexium, was brought into the firm as executive chairman. And the sneaker company Pony's also linked to the Circle of Men. And the Warner deal and purchase of Michael Ovitz's management company were collectively $2.6 billion deals. It made them exceptionally wealthy. And Michael Ovitz, by the way, started out in the mailroom of the William Morris Agency with a guy named David Geffen. And the Michael Ovitz co-founded Creative Artists Agency in 1975, served as its chairman until 1995. Then was the president of the Walt Disney Company from October 1995 to January 1997. Now, Bannon, in August 2018, the New York Post, reported that Bannon had been seen entering Epstein's townhouse. Neither Bannon nor Epstein has commented ever on the substance of their meeting. Okay. But when Ivanka Trump condemned Roy Moore's campaign in Alabama, saying there's a special place in hell for people who prey on children, Steve Bannon, who backed Roy Moore, responded, what about the allegations about her dad and that 13-year-old? So Steve Bannon has not always been on the side of Donald Trump. He's only on the side of Donald Trump when it's convenient. But how come Steve Bannon in 2018 was going into Epstein's townhouse? I don't know. That's very, very interesting. In 2018, you guys. Now, Bill Berkman, he's a guy who's in Epstein's black book. He's a wealthy executive whose family established the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. And he was sued in 2014 by his administrative assistant, who said she was forced to read emails Berkman had sent to a colleague containing pictures of random and unsuspecting women on the street. Creep shots, underskirt, upskirt shots. Then Robin Burley. Now, Robin Burley is a nightclub impresario. His name's all over the black book. Now, Robin Burley, for all of you out there who want some Meghan Markle kind of connections, he owned the club where Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had their first date. It was called 5 Hertford Street. That is where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had their first date. And the thing about this, and Burley's an interesting character. He has like these facial scars left by a tiger that mauled him at a family friend's private zoo when he was 12. And members of his secretive 5 Hertford Street, also known as 5HS. Leonardo DiCaprio is a member. George and Amal Clooney are members. And so we got that. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. So I'll give you one more. Conrad Black, all over Epstein's book. And he's best known for being sentenced to 42 months in prison for fraud. Then he wrote a book about Trump and then received a pardon. And then Vicky Ward, who profiled Epstein for Vanity Fair in 2003, said that Epstein heavily leaned on Black, who is her ex-husband's uncle and was her ex-husband's then boss, to try to exert his influence on Ward. So that's our first installment of what will be many. And I will talk to you guys later. With it. And let's start today with Leon Black. He is a private equity tycoon. His name is found all over Epstein's Black Book. And once again, like I said in the first episode, I'm not concerned with somebody who just has an email and a phone number in there. I'm really not. Like I said, somebody probably just handed a business card. I'm looking at these people that have 10, 12, 15, 20 entries crossed out, put in, obviously in communication with Jeffrey Epstein all the time. Now, Leon Black is the billionaire co-founder of Apollo Global Management, chairman of MoMA. And Black made Epstein the director of his family foundation in 2001. The foundation continued to list Epstein as director on its tax forms until 2012. That is 4 years after he had pleaded guilty to those charges in Florida. Now, the foundation said after the fact, oh, no, he resigned in 2007, and his name just continued to appear on the rolls because of a recording error. Okay, yeah. Well, explain then in 2011 why he was listed as an investor in Environmental Solutions Worldwide, which is a Pennsylvania company, alongside several people close to Black, including his 4 children. Black himself was seen with Epstein at a movie screening just a few months after Epstein finished probation in 2010. Epstein was spotted at a party at Black's home in the Hamptons in 2015. Oh, it was a recording error? Oh, yeah. So this Black guy, up to his ears, knows everything. So why is he doing business with Epstein, right? Is Epstein blackmailing him? Let's talk about David Blaine. Let's just go to a celebrity. He's all over Epstein's Black Book. And he put on a private show for Epstein's dinner guests back in 2003. He did card tricks for Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, who we'll talk about in a minute, Mort Zuckerman, who did a whole bunch of deals with Epstein, and Bill Clinton aide Doug Band. The dinner, organized by somebody named Ghislaine Maxwell, and included a group of young women who were introduced as Victoria's Secret models. What were they there for? And they weren't Victoria's Secret models. They were just there because Epstein was providing them to the other ones. Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, all over Epstein's Black Book. Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire, the private jet enthusiast, the former mayor of New York City, all over Epstein's Black Book. The Sultan of Brunei. Now, Epstein had at least one meeting with the Sultan when he traveled to Brunei in 2002 with Bill Clinton. Now, the Sultan of Brunei and his brother are famous for their lavish spending, including a collection of 2,500 cars, a $1.5 billion palace. And the Sultan was once sued by Miss USA 1997, who claimed that she had been held as a sex slave. Flavio Briatore, the F1 guy, the convicted card cheat, the race fixture in Formula One, a longtime fugitive in the Virgin Islands. This is a guy who was notorious for hooking up with yachters. And where did he meet them all? Of course, Jeffrey Epstein helped him a lot. Now, one of the things that's crazy is that you had Epstein meeting with all of these people. There was one day in 2014 where Jeffrey Epstein hung out on the same day, mind you, with Bill Gates, Leon Black, Thomas Pritzker, and Mortimer Zuckerman. And I mentioned the Google co-founder, right? So this is not somebody that wants to see his name on a list. But Sergey Brin, the Google co-founder, was advised by Epstein from 2004 to 2007. Why with Epstein? Including guidance on how to set up a tax shelter. Okay, I think Sergey could find a CPA. Okay, but that's not what happened. And Brin had become a client of JP Morgan Chase because Epstein referred him there. And then he held more than $4 billion in accounts there. And Black got set up with the same kind of tax shelter. Now, this is something that was hidden. We didn't know about Sergey Brin until August of 2023 because there was a U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit against JP Morgan Chase. Now, the former first lady of the U.S. Virgin Islands, this is where we get into the nitty gritty, how we have government people helping traffic women. And a lot of it was because of this civil lawsuit in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So this former first lady of the U.S. Virgin Islands, her name is Cecile de Jong. She started working for Epstein in 2000, continued working for him when her husband was serving as governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands from 2007 to 2015. So 2008 is when Epstein was convicted in Florida. And what else she did? She helped arrange visas for some of Epstein's victims. Helped get visas. She connected one woman to a local immigration lawyer, worked to get others student visas by arranging special classes for them at the University of Virgin Islands. She helped them enroll. That's what they did. And then I want to get you this theory. Okay, let's say you're on the left, you're on the right, whatever. Okay, Bill Clinton's on the left, obviously a great friend of Jeffrey Epstein. You have Donald Trump, obviously photographs seen with Jeffrey Epstein quite often. So during the first Trump administration, we didn't really see anything about Epstein other than the fact that Epstein was killed. But we didn't see anybody going after Bill Clinton. Now in the Biden administration, we didn't see anybody going after Donald Trump, although it probably would have been advantageous for them to do so and to tie him to Jeffrey Epstein, but they didn't. So then we start thinking about, well, maybe this is really into the government. Maybe this is because Epstein has these ties to both Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, Ehud Barak used to be the Israeli prime minister. He was a regular guest of Epstein's at his Upper East Side townhouse in the years from 2013 to 2017. So this is long after the bad stuff happened, right? I mean, we already knew. He flew on Epstein's jet. He would come to visit Epstein once a month. Why? He said that Epstein often brought other interesting persons from art or culture, law or science, finance, diplomacy, or philanthropy. He said that he never met Epstein with girls or minors or even adult women in improper context or behavior. So he's not saying that he didn't meet with girls. He's not saying that he didn't meet with minors. He's not saying he didn't meet with adult women. He's just saying there was never really any improper context. Now, Jeffrey Epstein and Saudi Arabia. Okay, well, what we found out was that Jeffrey Epstein used a foreign passport with a fake name to enter several countries in the 1980s. Why would he do that? He said it was because he was Jewish, but he used it to go to the United Kingdom. What would it matter if he was Jewish? To Spain, what would it matter if he was Jewish? Saudi Arabia, okay, but he was found inside a safe, along with $70,000 in cash and 48 loose diamonds. And Epstein's people said, well, he never actually used it. Well, yeah, he did. A lot. Then we have Bill Gates. Okay, Bill Gates, does he control the world? I don't know. But the connection between Epstein and Gates, we're still learning about it. But here's the thing. We are saying that Epstein didn't blackmail anybody with any of his videos or anything like that. That's what the government is trying to pass off to us, that Epstein just didn't do that. He was just doing it for himself. But the thing is, he did blackmail Bill Gates 100% because Bill Gates had an affair with a bridge player named Mila Antonova. This was in the early 2010s. And Epstein used that knowledge. We don't know how he knew about the affair between Bill Gates and Mila Antonova, but he blackmailed Bill Gates because of it. Now, Mila says that Gates is an avid bridge player. He had met her at a tournament in 2010 while Gates was still married to his ex-wife. Then she wanted money to fund a startup that would help people learn the game of bridge online. Now, Boris Nikolic, who's a friend and then scientific advisor to Gates, introduced Mila to Epstein in 2013. And Epstein arranged for Antonova to go to a software coding school. Now, in 2017, after the Gates-Antonova relationship had ended, Epstein emails Bill Gates saying, hey, I paid for Antonova to go to school. You need to pay me back. And Gates was like, okay, how did you know this? Supposedly Gates never paid Epstein, but we don't know that. And Antonova said, I had no idea that Epstein was a criminal or had any ulterior motive. Okay. Then we get to Ron Burkle. Yes, Ron Burkle. He contributes to everybody. And he's also a known person who loves prostitutes and escorts. So why is his name all over Epstein's black book? Why was he in Epstein's private jet? Now, Burkle took humanitarian trips to Africa with Bill Clinton on Epstein's jet. And Burkle's usual means of transport was on a converted Boeing 757 that Bill Clinton called Ron Air and that Burkle's own circle of young aides privately referred to as Air F1. And here's the thing. There are all kinds of stories about Ron Burkle and hookers. Here's a quote from a book. It was written by Mark Ebner. When I was flown to New York for Ron, we stayed in hotels. In Vegas, I'd stay with him at the mansions at the MGM, the Palazzos at the Rio, and those villas at the Mirage. He always had the best of the best. Whenever I would go to Los Angeles to visit, there were day trips, photo shoots I would fall for. On those day trips, we go to the house, and the photographer was awesome. The limo would pick us up from the airport. The best thing is that he would have accounts everywhere. We'd have lunch or go shopping on his accounts. I had a good time with Ron, and we would go to his house, and he had this jacuzzi and would fill it up with Mr. Bubble. I never knew Ron to get rough with girls, but I did know him to be a D. If he wasn't getting what he wanted, he would throw attitude. And the one common thing that Ron had with his friends was that they would watch girls get it on or get, satisfied with their hands or their mouth. They wouldn't actually have sex because they were afraid of AIDS. Yeah. Now, think about this. What was Epstein in jail for, you guys? He was in jail for sex trafficking and conspiracy. Faced up to 45 years in prison. Okay, sex trafficking to whom? Just himself? And what about Ghislaine Maxwell? She's in jail for 20 years for what? Sex trafficking. For Jeffrey Epstein? No. Not at all. Because go back to 2007 when Jeffrey Epstein is facing a 53-page federal indictment. He could have ended up in federal prison for the rest of his life. Federal jail. But there was a breakfast deal that was made, right? By a cabinet member. It was a later cabinet member with a U.S. attorney at the time, and a deal was struck. And what we're going to do is we're going to hide what Epstein's crimes were. We're going to hide the number of people involved. Is he going to serve time in federal jail? No. Just 13 months in the county jail. He gets to leave every day for work release. And what it did was it shut down the FBI probe into whether there were more victims and also the other powerful people who took part in Epstein's crimes. They did it back in 2007 and 2008, and they're doing it now again today. They don't want anybody to know who were the co-conspirators. They don't want to know who was involved in Epstein's crimes. They want no part of it. And then the crazy thing is they didn't even let the victims know that they were doing it. So that way, nobody could try and derail this secret agreement that they had with Jeffrey Epstein. All right, you guys, that is it for this one. I promise you so much more next time. I will talk to you guys I'm talking about the ones that have 10 items, 15 items that have penciled through and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the people that may have either helped, received, whatever with the trafficking, and also the people that enabled. And let's start with an enabler, one we're all familiar with, but let's go ahead and get reacquainted with Bill Barr. Now, Bill Barr, former Attorney General of the United States, his dad was Donald Barr, the headmaster who kind of offered entree, if you will, to Jeffrey Epstein and the rich. Now, Donald Barr was ousted shortly before Epstein came to the Dalton School. Epstein was 21, didn't have a college degree, but he showed up for his first day of working teaching math and physics at Manhattan's elite Dalton School in the early 70s. Now, Donald Barr announced his resignation soon after. He wasn't liked. He was highly controversial. He hadn't raised much money. He was authoritarian. But memorably, several former students told the New York Times that Epstein was overly familiar with teenage girls at the school. Now, Donald's son, William, now we've talked about Bill Barr before, but we need to go back in time because Bill Barr intersected with Epstein's orbit while serving as counsel at Kirkland and Ellis in 2009. Now, that law firm is very important. That's the law firm that secured Epstein his obscenely lenient 2007 non-prosecution deal, which we're going to go over in a minute. And now, when Epstein was arrested, Bill Barr refused to recuse himself from the ongoing Epstein investigation because he knows what was in the non-disclosure agreement. He knows what was in the non-prosecution agreement. And yes, there was both. There was a non-prosecution agreement and there was a non-disclosure agreement. We're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But let's talk first of all about the Rothschilds and how they lied about their connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Specifically, Ariane de Rothschild. She's chairwoman of Edmund de Rothschild Group. Now, in 2019, they falsely claimed that Ariane had no ties to Epstein, but she did. She married into the famous banking family, had more than a dozen meetings with Epstein. He sought her help with staffing and furnishings, as well as discuss business deals with her. And in September 2013, Epstein asked her in an email for help finding a new assistant, female, multilingual, organized. And Mrs. de Rothschild emailed back, I'll ask around. They were close, super tight. She bought nearly $1 million worth of auction items on Epstein's behalf in 2014 and 2015. This is way after he got out of jail for doing what he did back in Florida. And she even negotiated a $25 million contract for Epstein's Southern Trust Company. And they said, well, we made a mistake. Okay, well, yes, we did a little bit of business, but it was nothing personal. We know it was personal. He was asking her to find him a female assistant. Now, let's talk about the list. Let's talk about the people that are getting off scot-free. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at little nuggets. Now, Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, and also in Bill Clinton's cabinet. Now, one of the things back in 2010, as Epstein was being deposed and he invoked his Fifth Amendment right all the time, constantly through it. But one of the questions was, do you know President Clinton personally? And how many minors have you procured for prostitution? And did you ever have damaging evidence in your garbage? Okay, how many minors have you procured for prostitution? So it's not just for himself. He's procuring them for prostitution for others. And this line of questioning was also during, hey, did you know Bill Richardson? And did you socialize with Bill Richardson in the presence of females under the age of 18? So somewhere, somehow, somebody knows that Bill Richardson, Jeffrey Epstein, they socialized with people under the age of 18. Now, Epstein said, I'm not going to answer. I don't want to incriminate myself. Okay, let's go back to when the pilots of all the planes were subpoenaed. Okay, and one of the things was that the government's ongoing investigation of uncharged individuals, because the pilots knew who was on the planes, right? Who were on the planes. We have the one log, but we don't have all the other flights that he took, like with Wexter and stuff. So what they did was they subpoenaed the pilots. And the government was trying really, really hard to say, oh, yeah, where we want to investigate the pilots, we want to interrogate the pilots because we want to know who else was on board. And what happened to that? Absolutely nothing. Okay, the pilots would know. And the pilots were complicit in all of this because there would be references to unknown female on board. Jane was on board, and everybody's like, well, who's Jane? Who's the unknown female? Now, going back to 2010, 2009, 2010, it took place over a 2-year period. Jeffrey Epstein and others were deposed, and it's because of the victims from the Florida case, and so they were trying to get money from Epstein. And one of the interesting things that I'm going to attach it here, you can look at the photos, hit pause so you can read it all. And they start asking Epstein about this non-prosecution agreement. And they said, have you made any agreements with the U.S. Attorney's Office to avoid being prosecuted for any federal offenses? Because remember, in the last part, I talked about the fact that, yes, Florida is the one that ended up, prosecuting him. But originally, there was a 53-page indictment from the federal government. So then the question is, what happened to it? And they went back and forth and they said, have you made any agreements, anything like that? And he said, yeah. And they go, well, what's your understanding of the agreement made with the U.S. Attorney's Office? And Epstein said that if I abide by all the terms and conditions of the agreement, I will not be prosecuted. All right, well, did you sign that agreement? Yes. Did you have an opportunity to reflect on it? Yes. Did you have advice of counsel? Yes. Was it modified? I don't really know if it was modified or anything. Then they ask about a non-disclosure agreement because Epstein says, I signed this non-disclosure agreement. And the attorney said, I have a copy of it. And they're like, what non-disclosure agreement? And they answer, well, apparently there's something the U.S. attorney required before turning over the document. You have to sign some sort of agreement not to disclose. Okay, well, that's not just the only thing. What it is that the judge required any party who was given the agreement to sign the agreement, not disclose it to anyone. You couldn't even tell them that you had signed a non-disclosure agreement about the non-prosecution agreement. It's absolutely crazy. Now, one of the things that they've also said is, Jeffrey Epstein didn't blackmail anybody. He wasn't doing anything with those thousands of hours of videos. Well, let's talk about somebody he did blackmail, the future king of Norway, Prince Haakon, the crown prince. And he married a commoner, Mette Merritt Hoiby. And her son, by the way, is all involved in a bunch of assault allegations and drugging women and all of this kind of stuff. He's a horrible human being. Well, Mette Merritt met Epstein in 1994 in London. And for 3 years, she helped him recruit models who were then flown to Mexico and smuggled into the U.S. Were they all for him? No. And she was also involved in drug trafficking. And she had a sex tape she was forced to make. Now, Epstein tried to set her up with the future king, but it didn't take. Well, 2 years later, they tried again, and it worked because they blackmailed the future king. They got him with an underage model. That's what happened. And now she is set to be the queen of Norway, and this is the king of Norway. So yes, that is what Jeffrey Epstein did. She met Epstein in late 1994 or 1995 when she was in London. And she and the crown prince, future king, have made up this wild tale about, oh yeah, we met, we took a taxi cab together, it didn't work, and somehow we ran into each other a couple of years later, also in London, and we ended up taking another taxi ride together, and everything was just hunky-dory. She doesn't explain anything else. Okay, you guys, that is it for this one. I will talk to you later. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Let's talk about some more of the Epstein elites. let's talk about some people that are not only in the address book, but also people that were blackmailed, set up, forced to be with certain people. Because one of the things that the government says is that Jeffrey Epstein didn't blackmail anybody. Jeffrey Epstein didn't involve anybody else, right? That's why there's no list, because he didn't do anything. Well, let's talk about the Dubins. Billionaire hedge fund owner Glenn Dubin, for example, who is one half of an accomplished Manhattan super couple. His striking wife, Dr. Eva Anderson Dubin, who, if you go Google, you can find naked photos of Dr. Dubin back when she was a model. They founded the Dubin Breast Center of the Tisch Cancer Institute at the Mount Sinai Medical Center. They have 3 children, live a life of glossy luxury, private chefs, private jets, homes in Palm Beach, Westchester County, Sweden, and a ranch in Gunnison, Colorado. But Dubin's friendship with Epstein and Maxwell ran deep. So Eva dated Epstein for a few years before she married Dubin in 1994. She was set up to marry him. And Anderson Dubin stuck up for Jeffrey Epstein after his 2008 conviction on prostitution charges, saying she was 100% comfortable with Jeffrey Epstein around my children, who were minors at the time. Not only that, but Jeffrey Epstein always said that he wanted to marry Eva Dubin's daughter, who he met when she was much younger. Like as soon as she turned 18, that was the plan. But the Dubins flatly denied assertions by Virginia Giuffre, who in a 2016 deposition claimed that Ghislaine sent her to Dubin to have sex with her after training. There was these newly, unsealed court documents, and they contained horrifying allegations, not only against Jeffrey Epstein and those in his inner circle, but also a Swedish girl that was essentially held hostage on his private island. And that friends of Epstein's had taken her passport and phone and were demanding things from her, if you know what I mean. Friends of Epstein's had taken her passport and phone. Not Epstein. These are the people that are on the list. These are the people we need to be focused on. So these documents were released by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was related to the defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell. And one of the things is Giuffre's team cited testimony from a guy named Ronaldo Rizzo, and he was a former house manager for Eva Anderson Dubin. Now, per the document, again, let go, released by the Court of Appeals, Rizzo testified through tears in a deposition that he had once seen Ghislaine bring a 15-year-old Swedish girl to Dubin's house while he was working there. Now, the Dubins denied the allegations. They called them demonstrably false, but they didn't sue anybody about it, right? So Anderson Dubin, Eva, is Swedish herself, a former model and now a well-known doctor who dated Epstein before marrying her husband. You can find her name on Epstein's private jet flight logs. They were super friendly with Epstein. And Rizzo's description of encountering this 15-year-old in Dubin's kitchen is disturbing. He said she had no passport or phone. She was crying. She had no idea how she got to New York from the island. She sat down and sat in the stool with no expression and with her head down. She was literally quivering. He said that the underage girl blurted out quickly to him and his wife, who was present, "I was on an island. I was on the island, and there was Ghislaine, there was Sarah Kellen, Epstein's former assistant, who kept a Rolodex of the girls for him. They asked me for, certain activities. I said no. I was on the island. I don't know how I got from the island to here. Last afternoon or in the afternoon, I was on the island, and now I'm here." Rizzo asked her, "Do you have a passport? Do you have a phone?" And she said Sarah took her passport and her phone and gave it to Ghislaine, and that she was threatened by Ghislaine not to discuss this. So Rizzo's like, "How did you get to New York? How did you get to New York?" And she said she didn't know. And she hadn't tried to contact her parents. And that she said she repeated that before she arrived at Dubin's home, she was threatened again by Jeffrey and Ghislaine not to talk about anything. Now, okay. I mean, Sarah Ransom has said previously that Maxwell and Epstein kept her passport, so this is something that they did. They take the passport, no way to contact, and then they drop you off with somebody else, right? And what does that person do? So like I said, the Dubins have always denied this. But at the same time, this is Jeffrey Epstein dating Dubin, saying, I've got a guy for you. Hey, he's a billionaire or whatever. And now he's in with another billionaire. Now, how about this? I'm going to set you up with somebody else. This one, Jeffrey Epstein was playing the long game on this one. And he has some kind of obsession with the Guinness family because he's done this a couple of times with members of the Guinness family. But there's a woman by the name of Claire Hazel. Okay. She's a countess now, but she was really wanted for questioning in the wake of Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest. She's a countess, like I said, now. But back in the day, she was at Ohio State University. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. But the tuition was paid for by Jeffrey Epstein. Then she married Edward Guinness of the famed brewing family in 2001. They did file for divorce here in 2021. Now, the reason that Hazel is so interesting is because she worked for Epstein in the 1990s, and she flew on Epstein's jet at least 32 times between 1998 and 2000. So that averages out to more than once a month. And remember, she got married to Edward Guinness in 2001. But here she is with Epstein between 1998 and 2000, flying on the jet at least 32 times. He is shopping her around. Yes, shopping her around. Now, one of the things is, okay, well, how do we know that he was shopping her around? Well, basically, the Daily Beast went and interviewed a bunch of people who went to college with her, and they wanted to know, did you know this Claire Hazel and stuff like that? And they found this guy who knew her and basically described Epstein as Hazel's benefactor. And the friend said he got the impression that Hazel was at Epstein and Maxwell's beck and call. It's my opinion, but at some level, I kind of felt like she was being shopped to eligible suitors, which is why she's being flown around the country. And this former friend said that Hazel took him with her on a trip to Epstein's portion of Leslie Wexner's Ohio estate. And nobody knows exactly how Hazel was introduced to Epstein and Maxwell, but there she was. And she had this modeling portfolio. She had this hugely expensive Columbus, Ohio apartment. And he described an occasion when Hazel took him to a country club and had to purchase a racket and clothes for him so that he would be allowed inside. And that if Maxwell and Epstein contacted her or were in town, any other plans would be canceled because Hazel had to go be with them. And he recalled Hazel showing him photographs of her new boyfriend who had vacationed with her at Epstein's Caribbean property. And this guy said, in my conversations with her, she was looking for a certain man that was going to provide her with a certain lifestyle. Now, this boyfriend or whatever was not the Guinness guy. So she's just going from guy to guy that Epstein is setting her up with. That's the kind of thing that we're finding all the time. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to show you some more. Like David Copperfield, we're going to talk about another Guinness, Rachel Chandler Guinness, and all of these people that Epstein set people up with. Then we're going to talk about people that went to the island that we don't know their names, but we just get these little glimpses, these little things where it said, oh, so-and-so went to the island, and there was a UFC fighter on board the plane. We don't know the UFC fighter's name, but we know there was a UFC fighter. So this shows you that Epstein is actually handing these people over to other people. So how come we don't have the UFC fighter on the list? How come we're not talking about him? The government doesn't want us to. Okay, that's it for this one, you guys. I will next one, you guys, is it's really important. It goes to everything that I'm saying and why the government is lying, because we had a whole bunch of documents unsealed last year, right? And we didn't know about certain people, certain famous people that were involved with Epstein. It was only because the documents from court were unsealed. And one of those people was David Copperfield, described by Forbes as the most commercially successful illusionist in history. And he was one of these 170 people associated with Epstein in these court documents that had been sealed. So nobody had any idea. If those documents hadn't been unsealed, David Copperfield's name would have never, ever, ever entered into the conversation. But these documents that were unsealed showed a whole bunch of ties between David Copperfield and Epstein. And Copperfield's name appeared in a 2010 deposition of Sarah Kellen as part of a case against Epstein brought by an unnamed plaintiff. Now, Sarah Kellen, we're going to get into her in a different episode, but she was essentially Epstein's right-hand person. We always talk about Ghislaine, yes, but Sarah Kellen was one who was out there recruiting, was on all the flights, had a very interesting relationship with Bill Clinton. But anyway, Sarah Kellen also got a non-prosecution deal back in the day, the same time that Epstein did in the Florida thing. Now, Kellen worked, like I said, for Epstein and Ghislaine, had been accused of recruiting girls and facilitating Epstein's abuse. And she was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution agreement. But in the deposition, which if you go and read is just nothing but, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. But the plaintiff's lawyer asked if Kellen knew David Copperfield and about the relationship between Epstein and David Copperfield. And if she recalled a dinner at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion attended by Copperfield. Now, Kellen's lawyer objected to the questions, and Kellen invoked the Fifth Amendment in answering each of them. But the plaintiff's lawyer kept asking and asking if Copperfield and Jeffrey Epstein recruited girls for one another or were involved in sex trafficking. So David Copperfield, at least this plaintiff's lawyer, believed that David Copperfield was also trafficking girls. And the lawyer asked, do you know that when David Copperfield is in town, he gives Jeffrey Epstein tickets, and Jeffrey gives some to young women to attend those shows? And do you know that those girls are invited backstage after the show? So this goes to the whole thing about, okay, the government says there's no client list. Okay, are we talking about like a specific list that at the top says client list, right? Or something like that. Because if Epstein is giving tickets to these girls in exchange for going backstage, in exchange for getting the free tickets from David Copperfield and whatever else, is he not trafficking these girls to David Copperfield? Okay, because it's not just at Jeffrey Epstein keeping these girls for himself. They're going off to others. And Sarah Kellen keeps invoking the Fifth Amendment. But the line of questioning could point to more potential connections between Copperfield and Epstein. Now, before these unredacted documents in the case were released, Copperfield had not been linked to Epstein. Nothing, not a zilch. So how many more people are there that are like that? Now, according to an Epstein accuser, Johanna Soberg, Copperfield used to do magic tricks at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion and was aware that some of the females in Epstein's circle were paid to recruit others. Okay, so Copperfield knew all of this stuff. And Soberg met Copperfield at a dinner party with the lure of seeing Copperfield, do magic tricks. And then you think about, okay, well, remember all the trouble that David Copperfield has previously got himself into. There was Lacey Carroll, the 23-year-old former Miss Washington USA contestant, who claimed she met Copperfield at one of his 2007 shows in Washington State. And afterwards, he invited her to visit his private island in the Bahamas. And later, she told detectives that Copperfield sexually assaulted her while on the island, once by holding her head underwater to coerce her. Sounds a whole lot like what Epstein did while on the island. And the FBI investigated Copperfield for 2 years. They even raided Copperfield's Las Vegas warehouse. Now, the case was eventually closed with no official explanation. And Carroll dropped a civil lawsuit against Copperfield because he probably wrote a check. But why did the FBI all of a sudden closed the case. There was no explanation. They raided his warehouse. They investigated him for 2 years, and then all of a sudden, nothing. Now, Chief Division Counsel for the FBI in Las Vegas said, we're just confirming that investigative activity took place at the warehouse. Now, published reports said Carroll had come forward in Seattle to accuse Copperfield of sexual misconduct while both were in the Bahamas, and that agents had seized some $2 million and computer equipment. Who else had computer equipment and lots of cash? Epstein. These guys were doing the same thing. Now, Copperfield's attorney said, it's important that these allegations be put into perspective. I mean, $2 million in cash from the warehouse, along with its computer hard drive and memory chip from a digital camera system. Then there was Brittany Lewis. She was a 17-year-old model with dreams of becoming the next Elle Macpherson, when she says that David Copperfield drugged and assaulted her. And it happened in 1988, after she competed in a modeling contest in which Copperfield was a judge. Where did those models come from? I wonder if any of them came from Epstein. Okay, Jean-Luc Brunel. And basically, Brittany Lewis, okay, well, can we believe her? Well, the rap spoke to Lewis's best friend from high school, her husband, an ex-husband, and a grandmother, all of whom said that Lewis told them decades ago about her accusations against Copperfield. And a chiropractor said Lewis told her about the accusations 3 years earlier, and Lewis said she reported them to the FBI in 2007. That's the same time as Lacey Carroll. That's the same time when Epstein was right before he went down for doing the same thing. And Lewis said she met Copperfield soon after arriving in Japan, right? You got a 17-year-old traveling overseas. And it was site of the Look of the Year modeling contest held by Elite Model Management in September of 1988. And Lewis said that soon after the Look of the Year contest, when she returned home to Utah, Copperfield invited her to one of his upcoming shows in California. Now, she was still a minor. So Copperfield had to obviously ask grandma, hey, is it okay? And, you know, she said basically the grandma was a little bit apprehensive at first. But Copperfield said, hey, don't worry, I'll take care of him. And grandma said, you know, I believed him. He was very charming. And she said that David Copperfield promised that Lewis would be accompanied at all times and that she would be staying in a separate hotel room for him. Well, Lewis said she traveled to California. She believed the city was San Diego, but admits she's not certain after nearly 3 decades. But there were 2 David Copperfield shows in San Diego in early December of 1988. Said the trip started off great. Copperfield, who was 32 at the time, took her shopping, introduced her to his team, and she said she was flattered, but made it clear she was not looking for anything romantic. And when Copperfield tried to hold her hand at one point, she politely declined, telling him they were just friends. Now, grandma called and talked to her granddaughter and said that David Copperfield used a pseudonym when checking them into the hotel. The name was Simon Templar, a fictional character from the 1960s TV show The Saint. And grandma said, she said it was so exciting and they treated her so nice. He pushed everyone out of the way when he escorted her. Well, after the show, Lewis said that Copperfield invited her to a bar. She said she had barely touched her drink when she noticed him pouring something into her glass. And I asked her, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm just sharing. And she said she took a few sips after that and blacked out. The rest is hazy. She said she remembers bits and pieces of that night, mostly flashes of herself being carried out to a cab and him inside her hotel room wearing a black robe with shoulder pads. And she said she remembers him on top of her, kissing her and his breath smelling bad. And she said her room was connected to his by a door. I remember my clothes being taken off. He was kissing my face. And then I remember him starting to go down on my body with his face. And then as soon as he started going down, I just completely blacked out. She woke up the next morning feeling sick and nauseated. And David Copperfield came in, said he wanted me to know that nothing happened because I was underage and that he didn't, do what he could have done, let's say. Now, even though she wasn't due back home for a couple of days, she said that David Copperfield suggested it was best if she went back that day. And her grandmother said she knew immediately that something was wrong. And she said that before she left, Copperfield made her write a letter saying she was okay. And my therapist later told me that he made me write a contract to keep me quiet. Now, in this 2016 deposition, Soberg said Copperfield seemed to be friends with Epstein. And while at dinner at the mansion, asked her if she was aware that girls were getting paid to find other girls. And a lawyer for Virginia Giuffre asked, and what happened at that dinner, if anything? And Soberg said that young-looking females such as Sarah Kellen were at the dinner party. And she seemed young to me, talking about a different girl. I thought she could be younger than college age, but I had to assume for my own sanity that she was a daughter of one of his friends. Oh my goodness. See, this is the kind of thing. These are the people that were hanging out around with Epstein, doing the same exact stuff that Epstein was doing at the same time period. Okay, I want to give you one more. I know this has been a little bit long, but I want to give you one more thing. Because again, I kind of teased it yesterday, but there's this woman named Ruslana Korshenova, and she unalived herself. But she had been a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, she jumped from her 9th floor apartment balcony in June 2008, and she had visited Little St. James, which is Epstein's island, back in June of 2006. This is what's interesting. Okay, this is what we know, and I'll tell you what we don't know. But Ruslana flew to the island with Epstein and his assistant, Sarah Kellen, a bodyguard, a chef, and a former UFC fighter. We do not know who the former UFC fighter is. Why was he on the jet? Was he there for Ruslana? That's what it sounds like. Now, Ruslana at the time was 18 years old, but this is why the client list is so important. This is why we wouldn't have known about David Copperfield, who was doing the exact same thing as Jeffrey Epstein, who was best buddies with Jeffrey Epstein, but they managed to keep it quiet. We only got lucky because of court documents, because of Virginia Giuffre, by the way, and her whole trial. But what about Ruslana? Who is this UFC fighter, this former UFC fighter? We need to know. All right, you guys, that is it for this one. I will talk to you later. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. We're back with Epstein's elite. And again, this kind of goes to what I have said the last couple of episodes, is that we did not know about this person of whom I am about to speak until we had some documents in 2023. We had no idea that this guy was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. This guy that I'm about to talk about is quite possibly the reason that everything was shut down, the reason that we don't have a list, the reason we have all of this fake video from the jail, all of this, because of this one person. And that person is Peter Thiel. Yes, Peter Thiel. In 2014, Peter Thiel was gaining prominence as one of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs and investors. He had made billions of dollars as a co-founder of PayPal and Palantir, where he was chairman. He sat on the board of Facebook, where he was the company's first outside investor. That made him an ideal contact for Jeffrey Epstein, who obviously had this knack for cultivating the rich and powerful. Mr. Thiel, Peter Thiel, had several meetings with Epstein that year. That's according to scheduling records that were reviewed, that we managed to get because of a lawsuit in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We did not know prior to 2023 that Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein were buddies. And the records in the form of emails that Mr. Epstein's assistant sent to remind him of upcoming events show that in September 2014, Peter Thiel was scheduled to meet with Epstein on at least 3 occasions, either in one-on-one meetings or with others over lunch or dinner. Now, on 2 other occasions, Thiel was listed among more than a dozen other well-known people that Epstein should try to see while he was at his New York mansion. Now, it's unclear from the records whether all the meetings with Mr. Thiel took place. Some were listed as tentative. Some were listed as to be determined. Now, what's interesting, like magazines, newspapers, news outlets, they all went to Thiel to get a comment, right? And what do you expect the comment to be? I didn't know, I didn't know he was like that kind of guy. I did, the same kind of nonsense that we get from every other kind of politician. But this is Peter Thiel. This is the guy who took down Gawker because they outed him. Peter Thiel, spokesperson, declined to comment. Not going to say a word. Not going to make up some kind of story. Not going to defend it, whatever. No comment. Now, like I said, we got these records through a public records request to the Attorney General for the U.S. Virgin Islands because they had sued Epstein's estate. And the records suggest that Thiel had a really close relationship with Epstein, much more so than was previously known. And, even after the 2008 conviction, Epstein was everywhere, always trying to be with the rich and the famous. To blackmail, we don't know. What is Palantir, by the way? We're going to get to that in a second. But Epstein was fascinated with the technology industry. He attended conferences with high-profile industry executives. In 2015, for example, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, invited him to dinner. And also there, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Peter Thiel. That's quite the dinner. I mean, very much so. Now, on September 14th, 2014, Epstein was tentatively scheduled to have lunch with Peter Thiel. The schedule then changed, with Peter Thiel listed as having an appointment in the afternoon, followed by a potential dinner with Epstein, the director Woody Allen, and others. And Thiel was also expected to have lunch the next day and the following weekend with Epstein. But nobody knows why Thiel was meeting with Epstein. At the time, Thiel sat on the board of Facebook and also oversaw Founders Fund, which was a top venture capital firm. But Thiel was also the chairman of Palantir. And who backs Palantir? CIA, right? And Palantir at the time when Thiel was meeting with Epstein was seeking outside investments, but they are CIA backed. Okay, so that all happened in 2023. That's when we found out about it. Now, something else happened in 2023 with Peter Thiel. And basically, it was this male model and Instagram influencer who was in a romantic relationship with Peter Thiel and who died under very mysterious circumstances. Supposedly, this is there was a bunch of stories. First of all, this guy died trying to take a selfie. Number 2, he unalived himself because he just had issues. And then number 3 was, he was devastated by a messy confrontation with Peter Thiel's husband at a New Year's Eve party. And, this guy ended up unaliving himself, dying, whatever, in March, New Year's Eve party, okay, end of December. But this guy's name was Jeff Thomas. And he was in a relationship with Peter Thiel for a long time. He was essentially a kept man. And he showed up at this New Year's party. He hadn't seen Peter Thiel in a bit. He had been living in a house owned by Peter Thiel. That it was in Hollywood. Speaking of which, this house was once owned by Claire Bronfman. Yes, Claire Bronfman, the one who went to jail for Nexium. She was the previous owner prior to Peter Thiel. And also don't forget that Claire Bronfman and, and Maxwell were friends, and then Maxwell's sisters ran a company that's very similar to Palantir. Anyway, I digress. So Thomas, he's decided, I can't be this kept guy anymore, but I am going to go hang out New Year's Eve over at Peter Thiel's house in Miami Beach. Now, he was not on the guest list approved by Peter Thiel's husband. And Thomas had always said, well, if I knew that the husband was going to be there, I wouldn't have been there. Because, Peter Thiel's been married for 6 years. This is the other man, so to speak. And Thiel's husband was overheard asking Peter Thiel, why is he here? Now, Thiel and Thomas had met at Coachella in 2015 or 2016, but got more deeply involved during the pandemic. And it just kind of drained him. Even though he was, Peter put him up in a $13 million Hollywood Hills house, gave him a $300,000 car to drive. He just said, it's not very satisfying being a kept man. And I can't do this anymore. My mental health is at risk. And so there were all these quotes and cherry picking and stuff like that. And so everybody assumed that he did unalive himself. But this brings us to what I said at the very beginning. Is Peter Thiel the person responsible for none of the documents coming out? Right? Is he the person because of his connections with the CIA? We have Jeffrey Epstein's connections with the CIA. And the reason I bring this up is over the last few years, Peter Thiel has backed one particular political candidate like crazy, dumping tens of millions of dollars into J.D. Vance. Right? Thiel hired Vance at his global investment firm in 2017, kind of nurtured Vance's political rise, right, through Ohio and stuff, donated $15 million to his 2022 Ohio Senate campaign, and then helped him win, the GOP primary and then got the seat in the general election. He was the hand-picked candidate to be vice president. It was because Peter Thiel told Donald Trump, J.D. Vance needs to be vice president, period. And let's go back in time to prior to J.D. Vance or anybody knowing that Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein were buddies. So let's go back to 2021 and a J.D. Vance tweet and said, remember when we learned that our wealthiest and most powerful people were connected to a guy who ran a literal child sex trafficking ring. And then that guy died mysteriously in jail, and now we just don't talk about it. Now, at that time when J.D. Vance was writing that stuff, Peter Thiel was backing him, but nobody knew anything about Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein, or else J.D. Vance is probably going to stay quiet about it. And another J.D. Vance one from 2021. What possible interest would the U.S. government have in keeping Epstein's clients' secrets? Oh, and he said, if you're a journalist and you're not asking questions about this case, you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, what would he say now, knowing, of course, that Peter Thiel was up to his eyeballs with Jeffrey Epstein? Now, something else that came out in 2023. Where there was documents that Epstein had 3 scheduled meetings in 2014, the same year that he was meeting with Peter Thiel. He had 3 meetings with a guy named William Burns, who at that point in time was the Deputy Secretary of State in the Obama administration. They met both in Washington, D.C. and New York. And in August of 2014, which would have been shortly before the September 2014 meetings between Epstein and Thiel, a lunch was planned between William Burns and Jeffrey Epstein. And it was going to be at this law firm in Washington, D.C. Plus, Epstein scheduled 2 evening appointments in September 2014, the same month that he was hanging out with Peter Thiel. Where was Epstein going to hang out with William Burns? At Epstein's townhouse. And after one of the scheduled meetings, Epstein planned for his driver to take Burns to the airport. Now, that year, 1 month after meeting several times with Jeffrey Epstein, he resigns from the State Department where he'd been working, becomes president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And he remained there until President Biden nominated Burns to run the CIA in 2021. And the reason that Burns was nominated was because Biden's first choice suddenly said, oh, I don't want to do it. Why did that person decide they didn't want to do it? Now, the CIA spokesperson, when this came out in 2023, released a statement saying, oh, Burns didn't have any kind of relationship with Epstein. Quote, the director did not know anything about him, other than that he was introduced as an expert in the financial services sector and offered general advice on transition to the private sector. They had no relationship. Oh, no relationship, despite the fact that you're going to have dinner at Epstein's house in the evenings after you've had lunch. Oh, and that Epstein is having his driver take Burns to the airport. Oh, they had no relationship. Okay, whatever you want us to believe. Now, here we go. This is where it gets even more spooky. We have Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel and his kind of loyal lieutenant, Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir. They're both on the board of Bilderberg. Okay. Now, the other person who was on the board of Bilderberg until he got the role at the CIA was a guy named, you guessed it, William Burns. So William Burns and Peter Thiel, they're best buddies. And all of a sudden, William, Burns is going to be the director of the CIA who invests in Palantir. Okay. So do we think that Peter Thiel and the CIA, maybe they're the ones who said, you know what, we don't need to see any lists. We don't need to see any more people. We don't need to see any more digging. Let's just leave it alone. All right, you guys, that is it for this one. I will talk to you later. The podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Okay, let's talk about somebody, probably the biggest name that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with, and that's Les Wexner. Okay, very shady guy, Les Wexner. But before we get to Les, I want to talk to you about something that Jeffrey Epstein did way back in the day, where he basically got away with stealing many hundreds of millions of dollars. Jeffrey Epstein worked as a paid consultant during the 1980s and 90s at a New York financial company that participated in one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history. Now, that's according to court records and the accounts of attorneys and executives connected with the firm, which was called Towers Financial. Now, Towers was a bill collection agency founded by Stephen J. Hoffenberg, who told CBS News he hired Epstein in 1987 to help commit $1 billion worth of financial fraud. He was my best friend for years, my closest friend for years. We ran a team of people on Wall Street, investment people that raised these $1 billion illegally. He was my guy, my wingman. And the scheme worked like this, according to prosecutors who later brought charges against Hoffenberg, but not Epstein. Between 1988 and 1993, Towers raised more than $400 million by selling bonds and promissory notes to investors. Hoffenberg and his associates then used the money to cover operating costs, repay earlier investors, and enrich themselves. But like I said, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't prosecuted because it was about this same time that he was also working with Les Wexner. Now, Les Wexner, the mafia, the CIA, he's got it all. I'm going to take you back in time for just a minute because the state of Arkansas was a hub for CIA activity during the Reagan years and the Iran-Contra scandal, thanks in part to an Arkansas oligarch named Jackson Stevens. Now, Stevens attracted the CIA to his home state. Now, later on in the 1990s, Les Wexner stepped in and solidified a deal to bring Southern Air Transport, which was a widely known previous CIA-linked company, to Ohio. Jeffrey Epstein was a prime negotiator of that deal. And the deal was described by former Southern Air Transport spokesperson David Sweet as being too good to turn down. And it was during this time that Epstein assumed control of Wexner's finances and also was able to escape after stealing hundreds of millions of dollars in the Ponzi scheme. Now, during the negotiations, Southern Air Transport was owned by a guy named James Bastian, a former lawyer for the CIA. So you have an Ohio businessman linked to a crime syndicate and a hedge fund manager negotiating deals that relocate Southern Air Transport from Florida to Ohio. And then Epstein goes on to pen several names in his black book that are linked to the Iran-Contra affair. Now, Wexner's organized crime ties put him under an umbrella of suspicion as to what role, if any, he played in the unsolved homicide of Ohio lawyer Arthur Shapiro. Now, Shapiro was representing Wexner's company, The Limited, at the time of his death. He was set to testify before a grand jury about tax evasion and his involvement with questionable tax shelters. And law enforcement described the Shapiro murder as a mafia hit and suppressed police reports that implicated Wexner and his business associates as being involved in or benefiting from Shapiro's death. Now, Southern Air Transport and the Iran-Contra affair used to funnel weapons and drugs to and from the Nicaraguan Contras under the guise of delivering humanitarian aid. It also sent American weapons to Israel that were then sold to Iran by Israel and Mossad-linked intermediaries like Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. And Khashoggi was an associate of Epstein, and yes, he's in the Black Book. And as a side note, once upon a time, Khashoggi, when he got into trouble, sold his yacht to the Sultan of Brunei, who then later flipped it to Donald Trump. But during this time, Epstein told people who have publicly come forward that he worked for the CIA. He also claimed that he had also previously worked for the CIA. And Epstein was living at a New York penthouse that had first been purchased by Wexner in 1989. Now, Wexner himself never lived in the penthouse, but he had installed like closed circuit TV and recording equipment in a bathroom, basically. I mean, this guy had it all wired up. And this doesn't even include Epstein's brownstone that he got from Wexner basically for free, or the New Albany, Ohio house that Epstein managed to buy for like a couple of $1 million and sell for $8 million a few years later, which then gave him the money to buy the island in the Virgin Islands. But all these people are connected. And there was a route on the Southern Air Transport, the CIA thing, between Hong Kong and Columbus, Ohio, on behalf of Wexner's company, The Limited. They called it the Meyer-Lansky Run because Wexner's association with Southern Air Transport was related to his ties to elements of organized crime that were connected to the Lansky-created National Crime Syndicate. In addition, there's a former investment banker and government official who's investigated the intersection of organized crime, black markets, Wall Street, and the government in the U.S. economy, was told by an ex-CIA employee that Wexner was one of 5 key managers of organized crime cash flows in the United States. Now, Meyer-Lansky was a pioneer of sexual blackmail operations and was deeply connected to both U.S. intelligence and Israel's Mossad. Furthermore, many members of the so-called, mega group, which Wexner co-founded, had direct ties to the Lansky crime syndicate. All these people are connected. And if you want to take it back even further in time, you can go back to Bronfman, right? Because Bronfman's success during American Prohibition were the ties his family had cultivated with organized crime during Canada's Prohibition, ties that led many prominent members of the mob in the United States to favor Bronfman as a business partner. Bronfman liquor was purchased in massive quantities by many crime lords who still live on in American legends like Lucky Luciano or, Longies Willman or Meyer-Lansky. And most of Bronfman's mob associates during Prohibition were members of what became known as the National Crime Syndicate. Okay, that's exactly what we have here, and we still have Les Wexner. And because Lansky, with this organized crime thing, he essentially also was working with the CIA. He had close ties to the CIA and U.S. military intelligence. And during World War II, Lansky, along with Bugsy Siegel, worked with naval intelligence in what was codenamed Operation Underworld, an operation the existence of which the government denied for over 40 years. I mean, he knew everybody, absolutely everybody, and it brought us to Les Wexner, which brings us to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, one of the other names in the book is a woman by the name of Gwendolyn Beck. And Gwendolyn Beck is a very interesting person. She was at one point a long shot independent candidate for Congress in Virginia's 8th district. And that was in 2014. And Jeffrey Epstein actually donated to her campaign. Now, Beck said, well, I used to work in the financial industry, and I asked a number of billionaires in my Rolodex for donations, and Epstein was one of them. I did call every billionaire I know to ask for campaign funds, and Mr. Epstein sent the donations. I hadn't spoken with him personally in years, but during my years at Morgan Stanley, I managed a portion of his investment funds and knew him personally. And they said, well, the press has tagged him a man of mystery because they can't explain how he made his money. It was mostly a combination of real estate and complex derivatives. And at the time, he had a girlfriend he was very close to and was a hardworking, thoughtful man. I think he went off the deep end when she left and got involved in very bad behaviors, which he sought therapy for and paid his time in jail. And she said that everybody needed to forgive him. She also got money from Mort Zuckerman, who did a bunch of business with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the owner of the New York Daily News and U.S. News and World Report. You had George Albrecht, who owned a Boston area car dealership chain, also donated. Everybody was donating. All these billionaires were donating to this random person named Gwendolyn Beck. It's very, very odd. Now, Gwendolyn Beck's name in the Black Book is basically under this list that included contact information for masseuses. Because, obviously Epstein enjoyed his massages. And it's headlined in the Black Book, Massage Florida, and contains phone numbers for dozens of women, all of whom resided in the Palm Beach area. Some entries included brief descriptions like redhead, brunette, gymnast, gypsies girl. And the book was included as an exhibit to a court filing in a civil suit brought against Epstein by two of his victims. Now, other sections of the book include the names of female massage providers in Paris and the United Kingdom and the Virgin Islands. It has, like I said, just about everybody's name. But Beck said, oh, you know what? Then she changed her story. She said, well, I met Epstein years ago through mutual friends at Credit Suisse. I thought you met at Morgan Stanley. Well, no, I moved to Morgan Stanley later, but now I'm remembering that we met at Credit Suisse. Okay. And she said that she was unaware of the existence of the Black Book and asked a reporter whether it had been widely circulated. And she said also, well, I occasionally visited Epstein's house in Palm Beach, but I never saw anything that was questionable. I did recall getting a couple of massages at Epstein's home from a masseuse, but I've never given him a massage at the residence. I don't think I saw anybody who was underage there. Okay. I mean, that's extremely interesting. And then she has a little bit more to her tale, which you guys are going to really enjoy. In 2010, so this is 4 years prior to her running for Congress, she was a date of Senator Robert Menendez to a dinner at the Obama White House. So a state dinner. Okay. I mean, this is the same Robert Menendez who was cavorting with hookers. So why was she there? Why is she hanging out with Menendez? And don't forget, Menendez, this whole case about basically that he was sleeping with underage prostitutes at a Dominican Republic villa. And 3 women who made the prostitution allegations later recanted and said, no, well, we were paid to make these accusations, but the defense couldn't really prove it. And so the prosecutors were like, no, he really did do this. And we have the proof. And there was eyewitness testimony that Menendez co-defendant attended a party that included prostitutes, and then he flew numerous young women to the Dominican Republic on his private jet. And many of these young women received substantial financial support from Menendez and his co-defendant. And why is Gwendolyn Beck again hanging out with Menendez? Why is Gwendolyn Beck hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein? Why is Gwendolyn Beck running for Congress? Now, her cousin, Kristen Beck, also ran for Congress. It's just so much of this people and this intertwining. It's just crazy. And we were going to get to somebody next time that's going to blow your mind out of the water. But that's next time. I will talk to you guys later. welcome to another episode of the podcast. I think I told you maybe in part 1 of the Epstein Elite that I was going to talk about another Guinness, because for whatever reason, Jeffrey Epstein had a fascination with the Guinness family.
Yeah, that was gold.
And I want to talk about somebody that has been alleged to be a co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Her name is Rachel Chandler. She was born in 1989. And before she went dark on her social media pages, there were many photographs of her on Epstein's private island. Now, she graduated in June of 2005 from Brentwood School. Yes, she graduated a little bit early. It's a kind of pretty elite prep school on the west side of LA. And there were a lot of kids from prominent Hollywood and media families in attendance there. You had Jordan McGraw, who's Dr. Phil's son. Jimmy Iovine's son was class of 06. Jimmy, of course, is the founder of Interscope Records. And one of the things is that because he was there was Eminem and 50 Cent, and they would show up. And you'll see in these pictures, you will see Rachel with Sean Combs when she was 14 years old. You'll see her with Eminem when she was 16 years old. Arnold Schwarzenegger's kids went there. Andrew Breitbart went there. And Rachel herself comes from a very prominent elite family. She's one of many descendants of the Chandler family, which owned the LA Times for decades. And you can look up Otis Chandler on Wikipedia if you really want to get into it deep. And the family's divested of the paper today and not as powerful or prominent in LA high society today as they used to be. But up through the 80s, they were super powerful. And they did not so much foster the growth of Los Angeles as invented. And Harrison Gray Otis, Harry Chandler, Norman Chandler, and Otis Chandler succeeded each other at the helm of the LA Times over a span of 100 years. And the Chandler family dynasty ended when the general's great-grandson, Otis Chandler, was ousted as chairman of the Times board of directors in 1985. And the family eventually sold its Times Mirror company to Chicago's Tribune Company. Now, one of the reasons that this is all linked, this part with Jeffrey Epstein, is Jeffrey Epstein was also very interested in trying to buy media companies. He was not very successful. He would get Mort Zuckerman and stuff like that to try, and Mort obviously owned the New York Daily News and U.S. News and World Report, and that's what Epstein wanted. He wanted to control the media. Now, Otis Chandler, when he was the chairman of the LA Times, used his newspaper to scare the public about the threat of drought, drummed up support for a 230-mile aqueduct, which is one of the modern engineering marvels to divert water from the Owens Valley to Los Angeles. And he was part of a syndicate that also included Les Wexner that bought vast tracts of barren land in the San Fernando Valley with the inside knowledge that the Los Angeles aqueduct would bring water there. And this scandal later inspired Roman Polanski's award-winning film Chinatown. And we know the history of Roman Polanski. So Rachel is the heiress to the Chandler family fortune. And you have seen photos of her. I have them up here with her, like I said, with Sean Combs and also Paris Hilton. And she knew Paris Hilton for a long time. They were friends since Rachel was about 13 or 14. And Rachel was known for frequently going clubbing with Paris, hitting up movie and TV industry parties, going to fashion events, presented herself as an aspiring model. Now, nobody really knows what was going on during those events, but she was there, always partying with famous celebrities, rolling everywhere with Paris and Nikki Hilton. She was rumored to be a very big drinker and drug user and struggled academically. At this school, everybody graduates. And this, during the high school when she was there was an incident where Paris Hilton's phone was hacked and her contacts were posted online. That was one of the first major celebrity hackings that ever really became a big news story. And Rachel was about 15, maybe 16 at the time, and her phone number was one of the ones that was leaked because she was in Paris's contacts list. And during her teenage years, she knew a lot of celebrities, media industry insiders, and was going to a lot of parties that most kids at her school could never gain access to. She was someone who, quote unquote, matured quickly. And at the age of 18, she had a boyfriend who was considerably older than her. He was probably in his early 30s. There is also, of course, the tangential connection with the Rothschilds because Nikki Hilton ended up marrying a Rothschild. And a couple episodes ago, we talked about how the Rothschilds and Epstein had this partnership and they tried to hide it, but with documents that were released, we found out about it. And also, Rachel had a much deeper connection to the occult artist Marina Abramovich than most people are aware, because Rachel was the primary photographer for an artist named Terrence Coe, who frequently collaborated with Marina. It's very scary. And then in the mid-2000s, Rachel moved from Los Angeles to New York, where she studied art history at New York University's Gallatin School. She also interned for several art organizations, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, and for photographers such as Patrick Demarchelier. And he's best known for his portraits of Princess Diana, and also he was accused of sexual harassment by 7 or 8 models. There was one time that Demarchelier asked a teenage model, "Can I lick your yes?" and indicated he would make her famous if she said yes. And the model who detailed the exchange said no and left the shoot just right away. And Rachel also worked for as a DJ for the Standard Hotel before going into photography on a full-time basis. And the owner of the Standard is, of course, Andre Balazs, who is in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book, and who also owned the club's Area for Area 51 and MK for MK Ultra. And the Standard obviously has its own issues. And if you go on the podcast, I did several episodes on the Standard Hotel. Now, in 2013, Rachel married Tom Guinness, heir to the Guinness fortune and great-grandson of Diana Mitford. Tom Guinness is actually the son of a Guinness and then his longtime mistress. And I think the mistress ended up having more children than Guinness had with his, actual wife. And Rachel and Tom Guinness, their marriage kind of disintegrated because of all the stuff that came out about Rachel and Jeffrey Epstein. And at the age of 29, Rachel began a modeling company called Midland Agency in 2016 with a guy named Walter Pierce. And Walter Pierce is known for his photographs basically celebrating the devil. And it should be remembered that the Chandler family has a long history of worshiping the devil, especially the devil at Bohemian Grove. So the fact that Rachel is a devil worshiper should not come as a surprise. And Midland Agency's portfolio featured photos of young teens and children who looked drugged and beaten and dirty. It was very, very bad. And featured among the models were some girls from Jean-Luc Brunel's Paris-based agency. And obviously Brunel, who we'll get into in a later episode in more detail, was funded by Epstein and was a front for trafficking foreign-born models to the United States and other countries. And that gets into, hey, he's not just trafficking them for Jeffrey Epstein, he's trafficking them for clients. Again, the client list. And Brunel obviously was found hung in his cell back in February of 2022. His death was also declared an unaliving. And although Midland was immediately featured in all the top magazines such as Vogue and W and others, it mysteriously vanished. Now, Rachel's photo with President Bill Clinton, which I used as the thumbnail, is probably the best known image of her before she went into hiding. Is it on Jeffrey Epstein's plane? No. People will tell you it is. It is actually on Ron Burkle's private plane, dubbed Air F1. We've talked about Burkle. We've talked about all of his connections to Jeffrey Epstein and also Bill Clinton. However, let's stick with the facts. It is on Ron Burkle's plane. But Burkle is obviously another Epstein associate who, along with Steve Bing, who I've talked about in great detail too, provided Epstein and Clinton with a stream of new girls. And then on June 22nd, 2020, Steve Bing jumped off the balcony of his 27th floor apartment building. His death was also ruled an unaliving. Now, Rachel's ancestry page has been completely wiped clean. There is the names of her parents, and get this. She called Nancy Salzman mom, and I'm putting that in quotes, not her real mom, but her mom on Instagram. Now, Nancy was the co-founder of Nexium, and on September 8th, 2022, she was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Now, I have this blind item that I wrote back in 2019, and it goes like this. This one has a lot of moving parts. It also shows you how everything all ties together. back when the billionaire was first being investigated, there was someone who was really worried. He was a foreign-born A-list photographer in his own country. The guy was a legend, as big as you could get in the art photography world at the time. He was also someone who not only photographed models for the billionaire, but also recruited models who came to him. He is the one who found one of the top models recruits ever, the beer one. He used his daughter to do so, and the beer one and the daughter are still great friends. The photographer, he didn't want anything to touch his legacy or have his family know what he had done, so he unalived himself. And so that's Epstein, and the photographer is Bob Carlos Clark. Then you have Rachel Chandler Guinness, and then Bob's daughter, Scarlett Carlos Clark. I mean, just one big happy family. There's pictures of Rachel Chandler with Hannah Bronfman, who, of course, is the niece of Sarah and Claire Bronfman. Nexium in jail while Claire's in jail. Sarah managed to avoid jail. We have Claire, and remember we talked about Claire Bronfman and the home that she owned that she sold to Peter Thiel. Just all of these connections. And then Rachel Chandler's another picture with her, with Eliza Cummings, who used to date a Rothschild. There are stories that Rachel Chandler and Sean Combs got together when Rachel Chandler was at about the age of 14. And then the picture with Bill Clinton, she's probably about 18. That's everybody's kind of best guess. She could have been 17. She could have been 19. She's right on that line. And then when Sean Combs and Rachel kind of quote unquote split, she went to Eminem. And like I said, then she married into the Guinness family. Bill Clinton's Secret Service agent was at her wedding. I mean, what is up with that? And then, yes, the Guinness family, where one of the daughters worked for and with Harvey Weinstein, and she had a lot of stories. Ivana Lowell, the Guinness family heiress, spoke out about Harvey Weinstein's predatory actions in her book, published many years ago, and claims he threatened to sue her in retaliation. Now, Lowell is the daughter of Lady Caroline Blackwood, the granddaughter of Maureen Guinness, worked for Weinstein at Miramax Books back in the 90s, dated his younger brother, Bob. And in her 2010 book, Why Not Say What Happened, she described Weinstein's sexual harassment, how he would show up at her home unannounced and spread eagle himself on her bed, demanding a massage. She also said that he once chased her around his desk. Quote, the scene was comical, Harvey lying spread eagle, dwarfing the bed like Gulliver pinned down by midgets, and a friend and I laughing nervously, still edging as far away as possible. Weinstein would call me into his office under some pretext. His office door would be slammed shut, and he would playfully chase me around his desk. I was always too fast for him, and I don't think he would have done anything, even if he had ever caught me, but it made for an interesting work experience. Okay, you guys, that is it for this one. I will talk to you later. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. So why is it that we don't want to see the client list? Well, obviously, we want to see it. But why don't politicians want to see it? Why don't, people in the know want to see it? Why don't the elite want to see it? And I got this thing in my head talking about Jeffrey Epstein working for the CIA, working not for Mossad, but maybe as a go-between. Now think about this. Somebody asked me about the whole Saudi Arabia thing. And there's people who obviously have posted the flight logs, but why exactly did Epstein go to Saudi Arabia that one time during the 2016 US presidential election? And, no one ever comes back and kind of fills in the blanks. It's just like, oh, Epstein went to Saudi Arabia, during the 2016 US presidential election. And that's the way it goes. Now, the theory is back in the late 80s. And remember, this is when Epstein's really getting going, the late 80s. But in the late 80s, Israel was concerned that future American presidents would push for peace between Israel and Palestine. So to prevent that possibility, Epstein was recruited by Israeli intelligence to collect blackmail, powerful individuals to influence their future decision-making. And he also, ran guns or whatever you needed, and, made arms dealer meetings and stuff like that. And if you think about with Epstein, if you consider his early relationship with government officials, U.S. government officials, he was always going to be, a double agent with deep American interests, or these people wouldn't have entertained him. I mean, they're not stupid. U.S. intelligence obviously works with Israel all the time. They team up to accomplish tasks. And I don't think that there would have been the sweetheart deal for Epstein had he not been, kind of this agent that was working, for the U.S., but also for Israel. He was a middleman for U.S. government officials, Israeli officials. And it explains why he returned home to the U.S. to face charges. Operatives, they receive funding and contracts and long leashes and assistance getting out of jams. It happens all the time. If you watch, I've talked about it before, but if you've ever watched Lord of War, it's based on real life. And all the time, got caught selling arms. Well, you get out of it because they need those kind of people. Governments need those in-between people. And we talked about the Iran-Contra last time and the funneling of arms. And this is Epstein doing it also with the Israeli government and acting as the go-between. And that's why Epstein, everybody always talks about the people on his flight logs, but let's talk about the people that aren't on his flight logs, that would be, that would meet with him in the Virgin Islands. It was mostly arms dealers. That's what he was there for selling arms. But these people wouldn't fly on his plane, so we don't have them on the flight logs. And, assets are used at arm's length for information or on an as-needed basis. There's no contracts or anything like that. He's just being paid. He's not being paid by the government as an employee. It's more of a free agent kind of thing. That's the kind of thing about it. So, Epstein was there. And prosecutors reported that the flight records indicate that Epstein traveled on this private Gulfstream to Saudi Arabia on the eve of the November 2016 U.S. presidential election. Right on the eve of it. Why is Jeffrey Epstein going to Saudi Arabia right before we have a presidential election? I mean, immediately before. And then what was Trump's first trip after he took office? Saudi Arabia. And he met Mohammed bin Salman and then spoke to King Salman by phone. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, if you don't know, he's got he had a signed framed photo that was up in Epstein's house in his Manhattan mansion. And then when Trump goes over there's that massive weapons package deal. And now presidents on both sides of the aisle had utilized Epstein's services in the past. That's just something was done. That's why Epstein got the sweetheart deal from the Bush administration. He's obviously cozy with the Clinton administration. And like I said, he had that framed picture of Mohammed bin Salman. Now, the prince had visited Epstein a lot. You're talking about a guy in Epstein who's supposedly working for Israeli intelligence, as a go-between, an asset, not working like as a government employee. But he's got this connection to Saudi Arabia and arms. It's all about arms and guns and things like that. And the Black Book reflects that he had a generational friendship with the Salman family. Links to intelligence. And you have Khashoggi in the arms dealing. Khashoggi obviously is in the book. And the fact that Epstein traveled to Saudi Arabia ahead of the presidential election was just kind of, solidifying this relationship deal. And don't forget, we had that Austrian passport that listed a Saudi Arabian residence, a false name in his photograph. And he, his lawyer said, oh, it was just because he was Jewish. What? But that way he could enter multiple countries in the 80s, including Saudi Arabia. Now, he didn't need to have a separate passport because he was Jewish, because Saudi Arabia would have given him protection for whatever else he needed. Now, the interesting point is Trump made the deal with Saudi, but I'm telling you that Hillary probably would have made the same deal with the Saudis and sell them arms. That's just kind of the way it goes. And it's also interesting because the Saudis had given a lot of money to the Clinton Foundation, right? And Trump was all over that saying, oh, you got to give that money back. But as soon as he was elected and dealt with the Saudis, all of a sudden he stopped talking about that. Now, the only time that I can think about Epstein documented going to the Middle East was to Dubai, right after he hosted Bill Clinton on that multi-country tour of Southeast Asia. And the time that he went to Dubai, it was May 29th, 2002. And on that same day, Arab leaders endorsed a historic peace initiative that offered Israel normal relations with its Arab neighbors in exchange for land and the viable Palestinian state and a solution for the Palestinian refugees, the same day that Epstein goes there. And don't forget, the former Israeli Prime Minister Barak visited Epstein all the time. He's in the Black Book, so many different numbers. And then Epstein appearing in Dubai on the eve of this historical political event, and then the presidential election. He was a middleman. And there was a New York Times columnist in August 2018 who went and paid Epstein a visit at his Manhattan house because he thought Epstein was a guy who could shed light on Elon Musk's ties to Saudi Arabia. And the writer explained he was investigating Elon Musk because Elon was in trouble with the SEC over the tweet that announced that he had secured funding to take Tesla private and that the money was coming from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, which at the time had obtained roughly like a 5% stake in the company. Now, Elon got in a lot of trouble for that. And Epstein said, well, I advised them, Tesla and Elon Musk, but Tesla did deny it. And then right after that, the Saudi Public Investment Fund hedged most of its stake in Tesla. Now, we've talked about Acosta. He was a former cabinet member who's the one who brokered the deal for Epstein, the one in Florida. Then we have Larry Summers, okay, the former Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, Barack Obama's director of the National Economic Council, all over the book. And Larry Summers went on to be the president of Harvard. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein gave a ton of money to Harvard, liked people to think that he went to Harvard when he actually didn't graduate from any college at all. And when Epstein got out of jail, he ingratiated himself, and New York high society loved him. And he hired this woman named Peggy Siegel, who's all over the book. She's a Hollywood party planner, and she assisted Epstein's social reintegration by including him on guest lists for exclusive parties. Now, considered a social power broker in New York and Los Angeles, Siegel allowed Epstein to attend a film screening she organized in Southampton in 2010. And the event also attended by Rudy Giuliani, Stephen Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross. So another cabinet member, Stephen Mnuchin, another cabinet member, and others took place just 2 months after Epstein had got out of jail. And then in 2011, Siegel threw a dinner party at Epstein's townhouse. It's a fairly well-known party. It had Prince Andrew, Katie Couric, Chelsea Handler. So you have all of these people. And the thing is that Epstein and Wilbur Ross and Leon Black, they're all buddies at this Southampton movie screening. They came together because it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's just like, it's the power and the control. So that's why nothing gets done. And Wilbur Ross, of course, was the commerce secretary under Trump. And here he is, best buddies with Epstein, never said, oh, I don't want to be friends with you or anything like that. But here's the thing. And this is where it gets crazy. It's up to reporters who don't seem to want to do anything. It's up to bloggers. It's up to people who read the court filings and who listen to YouTube. It's up to everybody to scour the internet and look to the point where there's so much pressure that something has to be done. All right, you guys, that is it for this one. I will talk.
To forget yesterday, the week before, the years before. And then whatever they tell us in this moment, you should accept as truth. At the same time, they're totally perverting our focus. There's so many social media apps. Everyone has ADHD. Who in the future is going to have enough focus to read books and to produce reports or to even listen long enough to be focused on a podcast series? I would say that we better strike while the iron is still hot then. So welcome to an introduction of the Epstein files. I'm excited to be teaming up again with Xavier Poussard. Incredible work. He has worked on this forthcoming book regarding Jeffrey Epstein for years, just as he was working on the Brigitte Macron story. And of course, this is a story that impacts France, definitely the United States, as we're going through what we're going through right now, being gaslit at a very executive level. It impacts certainly Israel, Ukraine, Russia. Everybody is going to get a feature in this story. And I'll tell you this right at the top. The Jeffrey Epstein story really is one that begins with Robert Maxwell. Yes, Robert Maxwell, for those of you that are not aware, is Ghislaine Maxwell's father. He was, while he was still alive, that is, considered to be the Rupert Murdoch of the left. He controlled a media empire that stretched from England to Israel to France and beyond. He was mostly famous as the owner of Mirror Group newspapers, that is the publisher of the Daily Mirror. He also owned the Maxwell Communication Corporation, Pergamon Press, Nimbus Records, that was the first British record company to release CDs. Also, the American branch of Macmillan Publishers. We should talk about that down the line. He was a shareholder of MTV Europe, et cetera, you name it. He was also a shareholder of the French media group TF1. He was very much involved with the French elite. We'll discuss that as well in a later episode. He was even a Labour member of Parliament in the House of Commons from 1964 to 1970. We could go on and on and on, but you get the point. He was a very big fish, almost untouchable, really. And I'm going to tell you how he came to be that big fish because it's really interesting. You see, Robert Maxwell was born not Robert Maxwell at all. You're going to notice that a lot as we go through this series. It's a very sophisticated network of what I would refer to as name laundering. A lot of name laundering. You could be one person here, you're somebody else there. And to this day, Robert Maxwell's birth name is still misreported. If you look it up, it'll probably tell you his birth name was John Ludwig or Jan Ludwig. That's what the media says, but that was just another one of his aliases. His real birth name was Abraham Labi Hawk, okay? And he was born in a town called Silos Latina, which is today a part of Ukraine. I gotta tell you guys, Ukraine just keeps consistently coming up in all of my research, and it's starting to freak me out a little bit. Anyways, at the time that he was born, it was 1923. That was the year. And that town was a part of Czechoslovakia. And in terms of who was in his family, his known family, by the way, he's apparently a distant relative of Eli Wiesel. Now, this guy is very controversial. We don't have that much time to get into it. We'll have to save his story for another day, but he essentially becomes the face of Auschwitz. He published tons of literature about what happened while he was at Auschwitz as a survivor. And then other survivors of Auschwitz said he was making it all up and he was never there. And then they couldn't find him in the records. And they said, I mean, this is another Auschwitz survivor, that he was stealing the identity of another person who was there, but it wasn't him. It gets crazy. I only mention that because you will again see that identity crisis could have been the name of this series. It seems to be a running theme in this family. And also identity crisis is a running theme with anything that involves Israel. Anyways, back to Abraham or Jan or Robert. The story goes that he is from a Hasidic family. He studied at the yeshiva and his parents wanted him to become a rabbi. At the age of 12, he joined what's known as the Batar movement. And that is a young Jewish nationalist movement, a nationalist Zionist movement. And if you're wondering where that Batar is actually a location, you can see where this is going, in Palestine, present-day Palestine in the West Bank. From there, it is said that he joined the Czechoslovak army, and then he was in exile, a refugee that apparently participated in the French campaign. Now, I'm saying apparently because he has presented himself, Robert Maxwell, no less than 5 different versions of what his activities were from 1939 to 1940. What we do know is that he was arrested as a communist agitator, and he was among the Czech refugees that made it into the English camps. And then the story gets kind of weird because despite being a communist agitator, he was allowed to join England's Pioneer Corps. That's the only British unit that was open to foreigners. He then begins using two other names. Those two names are Ivan Leslie du Maurier, and also he uses the name Leslie Jones. Okay. He's assigned at that moment to work in Paris, and that is when he meets Ghislaine Maxwell's future mother. Her name is Elizabeth Maynard, and he marries her on March 14th, 1945 at a Parisian town hall. And when he married her, I should be clear, his name was suddenly Robert Maxwell. He uses the pseudonym when he's married, Robert Maxwell, and that's what he's going to use into the future. So at the moment, our family chart looks like this, okay? Robert Maxwell, here he is, AKA John Ludwig, Abraham Libby Hawk, Ivan Leslie du Maurier, and Leslie Jones. Nothing to see here, folks. Anyways, he then gets stationed in Berlin as a liaison officer with the Red Army. And the task that he gets is quite significant, okay? They have tasked him, this is the British intelligence agencies, to partner with a German publisher. The publisher was Springer. And he's partnering with them under the guise of selling scientific journals that were published under the Third Reich, but therefore were banned from export around the world. So he's teaming up with them. I can move this product for you. And then in 1951, just a few years later, he takes control of that German publishing house, Butterworth Springer. Again, he is still very much focused on these scientific journals that were published under the Third Reich. Why are they so focused? Why do they want these scientific journals? It might make sense as we get further into the story. Anyways, Butterworth Springer then gets renamed the Pergamon Press. And you should know that this was not out of his own interest in publishing. He didn't go about this because he wanted to be some big publishing magnate. It was actually because he was funded to do this by an extremely powerful family, by extremely powerful people. Like I said, this was an MI6 intelligence operation that was funded by Sir Charles Hambro. He is the director of the Bank of England. Sir Charles Hambro was from one of the most prominent families of the British banking establishment. It is the British banking establishment, then, we can say, that had an interest in this publications, whatever Germany was publishing at this time under the Third Reich, and that Hambro headed the special operations during the Second World War. In essence, I'm going to make it very clear, Robert Maxwell was just an intermediary, okay? And the British decided that they needed him to be an intermediary elsewhere, also in Russia. So in 1954, they send Maxwell to Russia, and he puts forth the idea to the Russians that, hey, I could publish and translate for you Russian scientific articles. Again, this interest in science. Germany, Russia, going in there, and they then give him access to Russia and its scientific secrets. I think we can connect the dots here. They were also interested in German scientific secrets. This guy's going over there pretending to be friends, and he's translating stuff, presumably for England, but actually no, because here's where it gets interesting. England, or people within at the tippy top, were getting quite suspicious about Robert. They think, I don't actually believe he's working for us. I think he's actually working on behalf of Russia. I think he's working for the KGB. And according to the British Foreign Office, the files that have since become public and were published in 2003, they started to believe and find out, they are able to confirm, that he was funded by Russia. So they kick him out of Pergamon Publishing, and they allow some American guy to run the company instead. Now, on the KGB side, they eventually do acknowledge that he was, in fact, a very high-up Soviet agent, but he was so high up that even the high-up Soviet spies were not allowed to deal with him directly. And so his allegiance to the Soviet cause was also questioned. The heck was this guy truly loyal to? Eventually, it would become apparent that he was not loyal to the crown. He was not loyal to the Soviets. It was actually Israel that held his true allegiance. As early as 1948, he played a major role in the decision of the anti-Stalinist Czechoslovakian government to arm the Zionist paramilitaries, right? He personally participated in the smuggling of aircraft parts during the 1948 war that led to the creation of the State of Israel. So the man who the British intelligence agencies described eventually as a Zionist that was loyal only to Israel. He was throughout his career a prominent Mossad agent. It totally makes sense given his earlier association with the Betar, that Zionist group, after his parents wanted him to become a rabbi. We learn more about Robert Maxwell through the lens of Victor Ostrovsky. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, it is because he is the man who notoriously defected from the Mossad. And if you don't know him, you should become familiar with his work. He felt that he had to defect because their activity was fundamentally unconscionable, and he ended up writing a book revealing Mossad secrets. The book is entitled By Way of Deception. He claims, by the way, that that is the Mossad motto. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. He was confirmed, by the way, as an Israeli agent, so he's not some random crazy guy publishing a book, and he was trying to alert the public to a lot of their shady tactics. And I'll just give you one example of that. Here's what Victor Ostrovsky had to say about the Mossad.
I mean, when I was in the Mossad, and we had a guy that gave us problems in the U.S., and he was speaking out, and he was talking like Pete talked once and said, Israel is bombing Lebanon with cluster bombs. We say, hey, who's that guy? You know, Pete Makaki, we used to call him. Yeah. Which is Pete the cockroach, because he makes a lot of noise and you can't get rid of him. So what you do is you get in touch with a guy in the station in New York or in the station in Washington. You say, tell the guys at B'nai B'rith to label him. And of course the campaign starts, and before you know it, the guy's labeled. And he's an anti-Semite, because that's what we say he is. And that's one stain you cannot wash. Now, it shames me as a Jew to tell you that, but that's the fact, and it's wrong.
Very honest, we've been seeing a lot of that as of late, as we start asking questions, meaningful questions that we deserve the answers to, particularly as it deals with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Anyways, Victor claims that regarding Robert Maxwell, quote, the Mossad financed many of its operations in Europe with money that was stolen from Maxwell's newspaper's pension fund. They got their hands on the funds almost as soon as Maxwell bought the Mirror, his newspaper group, with money that was loaned to him by the Mossad. I'm sorry, just to slow that down and make sure you understand, what he is saying is the Mossad gave him the money to go ahead and buy the Mirror Group publishing. And then the moment that he got it, they took all of the pension fund money and they spent it so that they could fulfill clearly Israel's interests. Robbing pension funds to support Israel, okay? I think what we can refer to then, this whole, he's pretending that he's a publishing magnate and he's in Germany and he's in Russia and now he's opening all of these businesses in the UK, we can refer to this strategy, this repeat strategy, as the Midas touch, right? We saw this in the story of Emmanuel Macron, a person that's just kind of selected, given a historical background. Suddenly we think that this person's really powerful and amazing and intelligent. It's pretty much the exact same strategy here. Robert Maxwell has somebody giving him money behind him, and he's growing more and more powerful in business. Now, in return for his fake status, I would say, as a publishing behemoth, the Israeli intelligence services allegedly sated Robert Maxwell's sexual appetite by supplying him with prostitutes. Again, this is a direct quote. Quote, the service maintained for blackmail services. Since it was revealed that the hotel that he was staying at was actually rigged with cameras, which allowed the Mossad to acquire a small library of video footage of Maxwell in sexually compromising situations. So even though he's working for Israel, Israel is taking out an insurance policy. They're recording him. He's got a thing for prostitutes, and they've got him just in case he gets any ideas. Which, by the way, knowing that they perhaps, maybe he did know they had this catalog of evidence against him since they were the ones supplying the prostitutes, that might explain why Robert Maxwell was so loyal to Israel that he even ratted out his fellow Israelis, or other Israelis, I should say, who tried to do the right thing. So let me tell you this. There was this guy, Mordecai Vanunu. He was a nuclear technician, an Israeli, but he was also a peace activist. He did not believe in weapons of mass destruction. So when he was working in that capacity and discovered that Israel was in fact building weapons of mass destruction related to the extremely controversial Dimona nuclear facilities, right? The nuclear facilities that for a long time they claimed they totally didn't have. He tried everything in his capacity to alert the world to what they were building. He took pictures, and then he took the information that he had, unfortunately, to Robert Maxwell's Mirror publications. And rather than doing what he should have done as a British citizen, sensing a threat to the UK, a threat and saying, hey, they are building a nuclear stockpile, he alerted the Israelis. Robert Maxwell decided to take that information and alert the Israelis that this guy was defecting. And what did the Israelis do? Well, they lured Vanunu to Italy. And then they drugged him. And then they abducted him. And then they secretly transported him to Israel and ultimately just convicted him in a trial that was held behind closed doors. Yeah. The only democracy in the Middle East. Vanunu then spent 18 years in prison, including more than 11 of those years in solitary confinement. He is still being harassed by the Israeli government to this day, who view him as a traitor. What are you going to do? That's what it means to be friends with Robert Maxwell. Ever the negotiator, however, Robert Maxwell also played mediator between Edgar Bronfman Sr. I want you to remember his name, Edgar Bronfman Sr. At this point in time, he was the president of the World Jewish Congress, and Maxwell was playing mediator between him and the Soviet authorities during what came to be known as the Refusnik crisis. Essentially, suddenly Israel wanted to get a lot of their people out of Russia. Russia was refusing to allow these people to all just go to Israel, and he then plays negotiator and makes it happen. He later partnered, this is Robert Maxwell, partnered with the Soviets to take over the pharmaceutical company Teva. And then he also takes ownership of the Jerusalem Post in Israel, where he already controlled the right-wing Daily Maariv publications in Israel. That all took place in 1989, right? What you could say, looking at that, is that the appearance of the outward world was that he was a hotshot publisher who was just expanding his portfolio. Now he's in pharmaceuticals and he's picking up other publications. Now they're in Israel. Truly, he was in his prime. Unfortunately, however, on November 5th, 1991, Robert Maxwell's naked body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean off the Canary Islands, where he had been enjoying himself on his yacht, a yacht named the Lady Ghislaine. Interesting, because he has 9 kids, but he decided to name this yacht after Ghislaine. A few weeks after his death, a $560 million hole was discovered in the Mirror's pension fund. Oops. Yeah, I was running it by robbing it. It's going to be a common theme when we get into what Epstein was up to. The British investigative journalists Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon explained how his death came about. They say that Maxwell sealed his fate when he threatened Mossad leadership. He threatened to disclose certain operations that they were a part of unless they helped him save his media empire, because then people were realizing this business is not doing so well. What's going on? He was feeling the pressure, and he's like, hey, come on. I gave you $560 million, maybe more. Okay. Give me something to save my company, or else, you know, I gave you this slush fund. Come on, have some decency. And they didn't have the decency to do that. Instead, they deemed that Maxwell was too dangerous. And so the Mossad leadership reportedly, allegedly ordered his assassination 3 months later. No biggie, though, no hard feelings, because they did still show up to his funeral. They wanted to show their appreciation for all of his work, his commitment. So on November 8th, 1991 in Jerusalem, they held a funeral for him on the Mount of Olives. It was attended by the cream of the Israeli intelligence pie. There was no fewer than 6 service heads. There were politicians, including Chaim Herzog, Ehud Olmert, Shimon Peres, and the current, at that time, Prime Minister, Shamir, who delivered the eulogy, by the way. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir delivered the eulogy. And in his eulogy, he celebrated Robert Maxwell as the man who did more for Israel than we can explain today. Then they had a prayer, which was read by Samuel Peiser. And that is also another name that you should remember. We'll get into that. So you got Samuel Pizer, because he's going to be relevant. He was Robert Maxwell's lawyer and business representative in France, but then he kind of held the same position later for Jeffrey Epstein. Anyways, enough about Robert Maxwell. This brings me to Ghislaine Maxwell. You know, she really was the apple of her daddy's eye. Loved him so much. He loved her back so much so that he names that yacht after her, like I said. So let's get into some interesting facts about her and her upbringing. But first, I'm going to throw it to some of our sponsors. Remind you guys about Riverbend Ranch, because if you haven't heard about Riverbend Ranch, it is time that you did. Their beef has more flavor and tenderness than any beef that I have ever tasted, and it will be the same for you guys. The Angus herd at Riverbend Ranch is not your average Angus cattle. 35 years ago, using ultra-selfish credit card debt, and then you maybe second guess yourself because it kind of shifted depending on when you checked the press. At various times, they told us that she was an interior designer. Sometimes they told us that she was a socialite. Sometimes they told us that she was an internet operator. Whatever that is, it's all very confusing. Factually, what I can tell you is that Ghislaine Noël Marion Maxwell was born on Christmas Day of 1961, December 25th. And she was born in France, Maison Lafitte. She spent her childhood very well-to-do, very wealthy, at Headington Hill Hall, which is a casual 53-room palace, Italian mansion thing that's rented from the Oxford municipality by her family. She is the youngest of 9 children. Back in 2003, so this was before Jeffrey Epstein was ever charged for any crimes, the Evening Standard published an interesting article about Ghislaine. They were discussing how she settled in New York after her father's death, how she was picking up her own life. And they wrote this. They wrote, quote, Ghislaine has expanded her social surface, largely thanks to what the real estate developer Epstein has done for her. She has become the queen of the billionaire social circuit. They also wrote, quote, Jeffrey only likes billionaires and very young women and uses Ghislaine as his social pimp. That is very telling. And that same article elsewhere mentions that there were rumors that, quote, the bizarre parties held at Maxwell's house, where she invites a dozen young girls, then brandishes a whip and teaches them how to enhance their sexual performance, end quote. But again, this was 2003, so Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine were just getting away with so much. They were just outwardly, I guess, allowing journalists to know what they were into, and they are into some weird stuff. Now I want to quickly fast forward to the summer of 2019. Now we have unpacked this on the podcast this week. That is the notorious summer when Jeffrey Epstein, quote unquote, kills himself. Leading up to this moment, Ghislaine Maxwell had sort of gone missing. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in mid-June. They then transport him to a special housing unit. And then he decides, after only a few weeks in custody, that he just can't take it anymore. Like he's just, I can't be a part of this anymore. I have to exit life. Of course, during those just a few weeks leading up to his quote unquote suicide, Ghislaine Maxwell was being hunted down by the media. Jeffrey Epstein gets arrested. He lands at Teterboro Airport, coming back from, of course, Paris. And instantly the press is in a frenzy going, wait, where's Ghislaine? Where's Ghislaine? Because she's likely very guilty too. The public wanted her to be arrested as well. And then, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's suicide happened. And I should say right now, it was apparently a very big week for the New York Post. Because remember, on August 10th, it was them that got the world exclusive photos of Jeffrey Epstein just following the suicide attempt. So they didn't know if he was still hanging on here in these shady photos, but he was being transported from the prison to the hospital, and waiting there was a New York Post photographer who captured the exclusive images at like 7:30 in the morning. Totally not weird at all. And that photog also has another name, another alias, and he doesn't want to talk about capturing those world's photos or how he got the scoop so quickly, and how quickly he maybe fought traffic to get that photo or to answer any questions about those photos. No, he just kind of falls off a cliff. The New York Post gets the exclusive photos. That's great, right? And I've been kind of telling you guys for a while that the New York Post is an Israeli op, in my opinion, looking at all of the facts that are available to me. Anyways, that was August 10th. Big week for them. They got the exclusive photos. 3 days later, on August 13th, they joined the chorus of other people who are going, whoa, 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 Jeffrey Epstein's now dead. Where is Ghislaine Maxwell? Where is she? Where is she? And they pretend that they're investigating Ghislaine Maxwell in earnest, right? They start wanting to build trust with their audience. Like, yeah, no, we totally want to find Ghislaine too. And they publish a piece on page 6 on August 13th detailing her sexcapades. A source tells them, and they publish it from the source, that while Ghislaine Maxwell posed for photos in a publication promoting Sotheby's vintage fashion collection, she allegedly also dropped hints about her twisted double life. The source told them, quote, she didn't mention Epstein, but during the session, she recounted how she had just hosted a dinner party for a number of young girls and that she had put sex toys on every chair. Ghislaine then described how during the dinner party, 2 of the guests, a couple, began in front of everybody demonstrating, I'm just going to say here, a sex act. And the person notes that Ghislaine laughed about that. And that a friend of hers has a theory that Epstein was just like Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, who himself had practiced kind of strange sexual tastes, strange sexual practices, if you will. So that's August 13th. They're like, yeah, no, we want to find this person as well. And then magically on August 15th, the New York Post gets lucky again, you guys. More photography luck. The world is searching for Ghislaine, and miraculously, the New York Post finds her. Here is the cover of the New York Post, which ran on August 15, 2019, just 5 days after Jeffrey Epstein suicided himself. Now, they ran with the headline, "The Post finds her." Don't worry, world. You don't have to look for Ghislaine anymore because the Post has located her. It's so predictable, you guys, I gotta tell you. Now, according to the story that was embedded into the Post, the person who took the photo was just like a regular person who happened to realize that Ghislaine Maxwell was sitting at In-N-Out. And then that person clearly gave the photo to the New York Post, maybe because they had this fantastic luck with Jeffrey Epstein. And the New York Post diligently reported, here she is at the In-N-Out. And believe it or not, she's just in the middle of LA. But man, you guys, I got to tell you, you might not remember this, but that photo of her in In-N-Out, that turned out to be quite the scandal itself, because there were apparently a few things that were wrong with this exclusive photo published by the New York Post. You see, the Daily Mail decided to check out, after hearing rumors that something was maybe Photoshopped, they decided to check out the metadata of the photo. Oh, the pesky metadata again. And what they discovered was that in the metadata, it was tagged as a photo taken by Meadowgate. Okay. Meadowgate, it turned out, was a company owned by a woman named Leah Safian. And when they began looking into Leah Safian, they discovered that she had a dog that looked a lot like the dog that was in the photo of Ghislaine Maxwell in In-N-Out. And yeah, it seemed to be sitting under her. So is this a random person who took this photo, or did Leah Safian take this photo, or was she the random person and Ghislaine held her dog or something? No, it turned out, you guys, that Leah Safian also happened to be the attorney and the fixer for the Maxwell family. She was one of Ghislaine's defense attorneys. And yeah, no, this was a staged photo. And as if that couldn't get any worse for the New York Post, the photo itself had some peculiarities, which suggest that it was photoshopped as a twisted joke. Foremost, the poster in the background, okay, if you see the bus stop, she's behind her, just behind the In-N-Out, there's a bus stop, and it has a movie poster for the film Good Boys. Good Boys was, in fact, a film that was coming out that year or that week, and it was a comedy about the sex lives of preteens. I'm not kidding. She happens to take this photo. Okay, her lawyer happens to take this photo of her at the In-N-Out, and behind them is a movie poster about the sex lives of preteens. Yeah, no, the only problem with that is that immediately after this was published, the owners of that bus stop, okay, out front, you might see that on a lot of like these little bus stop cubicle thingies. It says like out front on the top. People actually own those. And out front came out and said, no, that's photoshopped. We never put up that advertisement for that movie. They spoke to the Daily Mail. A media spokesman for Outfront, her name was Carly Zip, gave an on-record statement. She said, we think it was photoshopped. She said, quote, we do not have any records of this Good Boys poster being posted there. Outfront keeps meticulous records of exactly which posters are displayed at the bus shelter locations across the U.S. But Zip insists that the bus shelter outside the In-N-Out Burger where Maxwell dined did not have that poster. She said, we have no record of Good Boys having ever been posted. We had our installers check the logs. They even went out there to check. There is no evidence that Good Boys was ever posted. Crazy. Instead, Zip claimed that they were running, since July 28th, a poster advertising the Providence St. Joseph's Medical Center. And by the way, the Daily Mail then got their reporters down there and they saw that there was an advertisement 4 days later for the Providence St. Joseph Medical Center. And then we decided, like my team decided to go back, on Google Maps, you can go back and see what was outside of In-N-Out. And even though they didn't have anything captured from that August day, we did see that even back in May of 2019, sure enough, they were running a Providence St. Joseph's medical ad. That best ensemble cast thing that you're seeing right there in the picture, that is a Providence St. Joseph medical ad. So they were saying, we do this. This is what was here. We were running that. And so who put that poster in the background? Who did that and why? That's not it, you guys. It's giving Emmanuel Macron's presidential portraits. Oh, is that Andre Gide? Is that the book we put in the background of the pederast? Oh, uh-oh. Just us kind of winking and being sadistic and funny to ourselves. Beyond that, the book Ghislaine Maxwell was reading is really just an FU to the public, okay? The title of that book that she's reading in front of the In-N-Out is The Book of Honor, The Secret Lives and Deaths of the CIA. That's just fantastic. Her lawyer captures her. I mean, is a photo, was she even there? Who knows? Incroyable. Really just incredible work from the New York Post. Remember, this is the same week that they got the exclusive photo of Epstein. See, there's the proof. He actually killed himself. We got the exclusive photo. Now it's like, go away, everybody. Don't look for Ghislaine anymore because we got the exclusive photo. What actually happened? Now, this is not based on any reporting of Xavier Poussard. This is me just surmising myself here. But it looks like an alibi was being created. Like the New York Post might actually be an outfit, and I don't want to say it, might, maybe, allegedly, of Israel. And they were protecting their agents, but also doing it in a really sadistic, wink at the world, ha, what can you do about it way? Anyways, back to Ghislaine, because she is the daughter of a Mossad agent. There's no question about that. Robert Maxwell is her father, and the Mossad does not deny that Robert Maxwell was an agent, and therefore the most obvious link between Epstein and the Mossad would be Ghislaine. But currently, we are being told by the media, by the mocking Israel puppets, by Israel's former prime minister who's come out against Tucker Carlson on X, that it is ridiculous to suggest that Epstein could have been working for the Mossad. There is no evidence that is anti-Semitic. What happened to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, bro? This is like, I don't even know, Newspeak. This is them doing that thing where they delete history right as it's happening and think that nobody's going to go backwards and take a look at what actually happened, or if there was maybe somebody who told us that Epstein was working with Robert Maxwell. Because the news story that's emerging is that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell met in the 90s, right? So they're saying that news story because Robert Maxwell was already dead. That thereby deletes any possibility that Epstein could have been connected to the Mossad via Robert Maxwell. He really just genuinely met Ghislaine Maxwell in the 90s. And I really hate to destroy that narrative. Actually, I'm lying. I don't really hate to destroy that narrative. I actually just hate liars. But here we go. This is a guy I'd like to introduce you to. His name is Ari Ben-Menashe. He's a man who claimed to have had several meetings with Jeffrey Epstein in Robert Maxwell's office all throughout the 80s. Like a decade before the media is telling you Ghislaine met Epstein. Ari Ben-Menashe would certainly know, considering he worked for the Mossad, and he even spent time in prison due to his work for the Mossad because he got caught being an agent for Israel. I'm going to show you this clip, and credit here to the work, tremendous work, and we'll credit people along the way here. Whitney Webb, Zev Shalev, these people who have been on this Epstein story for years. Well, Zev Shalev has a podcast called Narrative, and he interviewed Ari Ben-Menashe in 2019. I'm going to show you a couple of these clips. If you're listening to this on audio, it might be difficult for you to decipher if you're not reading along, but it's okay because I'm going to break down everything after. Here is the first clip. And again, this is Ari who is speaking with Zalev. Take a listen.
So Maxwell introduces you. He says, here's this young guy. And did he go by the name Jeffrey Epstein or did he go by a different name?
I remember Epstein, Jeff Epstein.
Okay. Because he had a different passport that he was traveling in and out of.
That's right. But that came later.
Okay. So he says to you, here's this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, who I know from around.
And your Israeli bosses have approved.
Oh, okay.
Already approved.
So it came down from up above. So what did he do? Can you say what he did for you? Or like what kind of work did you guys do together?
No, he didn't do anything.
Oh, so you met him and that was it?
I met him a few times in Maxwell's office. That was it.
And did he do any arms deals for anybody else that you were aware of?
Not that I know.
Because there was there's the, I guess it was an
He didn't.
MI5
He
operation.
wasn't very competent. He didn't seem to be a competent guy. He didn't seem to be. But he was a good-looking guy. And Miss Maxwell.
Ghislaine,
fell for him.
Early in the 80s.
So he is describing how he met Jeffrey Epstein in Robert Maxwell's office. And he is making it clear that he was with Ghislaine. He thinks Ghislaine loved Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm going to let you listen to another clip where he describes how both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine were agents for Israel. Take a listen.
She got involved with Israeli intelligence together with him.
Right.
But not in this arms deal in Iran, no business.
Would you say she was an agent as well? Was she someone working for Israeli intelligence?
Oh, definitely.
Military intelligence as well?
Yes.
And when that happens, because I have no idea how that world works, so I'm learning a little bit.
It happened by accident.
Do you get orders and you have to do certain things, or is it more like...
No, you get projects. What really happened, my take on it, and the later thing, is that these guys were seen as agents, but they weren't really competent to do very much. And so they found a niche for themselves, blackmailing American and other political figures.
For the Israelis? So it's hard for people to understand why Israel would want to get blackmail on an American. I'm asking a question that I can answer it quite properly, but for most people, it's hard for them to think about Israel as being blackmailing their leaders in the United States. It's a very...
It was quite a MO. See, sleeping around is not a crime. Maybe embarrassing, but not a crime. But sleeping with underage girls is a crime.
That's a lot to unpack. Okay. So he is telling us, first and foremost, that Epstein did not seem like a very competent guy. That's incredible because that lets us know the hand of Midas was upon him. We've discussed, and we will again discuss Epstein's incredible career. Yeah, just like Emmanuel Macron, he was a savant. But this guy who is working for Israeli intelligence says he wasn't a competent guy. He was a good-looking guy. Tells us Ghislaine Maxwell fell in love with him because of that reason, he thinks. But no, Jeffrey Epstein was, according to him, a part of the Maxwell family business. And his theory is that perhaps Robert Maxwell thought that he would be a good fit for his daughter. And he's telling us that at this time, Epstein was traveling back and forth between London and the Middle East, and he would often pass by Robert Maxwell's office. And this interview is very long, and we are going to link it below so that you can watch it in its entirety. According to Ari Ben-Menashe, Ghislaine Maxwell would accompany her father often, and she was involved, at least to some extent, in his intelligence activities. Now, Ari Menashe is very clearly stating that they found a niche. The two of them were not confident, but they found a niche, and that was collecting blackmail on American politicians. That they were able to do this. They were facilitating this blackmail, and therefore they were valuable. They became valuable to the Mossad because they were able to get blackmail. Again, this is coming from Ari Minaj, who is now an Israeli-Canadian citizen who worked for the Mossad in arms deals. And that is the reason why he says that he met with Epstein in Robert Maxwell's office. Ari Minash's meeting with Epstein in Robert Maxwell's office in London dates back to the Iran-Contra scandal. Now, you might not remember this. If you're like me, and I'm born in 1989, at the end of the decade, this was a very big scandal that happened in the 80s under President Reagan's administration. And I will give you the details here. Essentially, what happened was Iran was under an arms embargo from the United States, meaning we were not going to give Iran any weapons. We weren't going to give them any military equipment because, you know, we can't fund or support terrorist activities in the Middle East. But then suddenly the American government does a 180 on that. They're like, we actually are going to ship some arms to Iran. And the American people are informed that the only reason the government is doing this and the only reason we're going to temporarily remove this embargo is because then we can get back some American hostages. They claimed Iran would be able to work with their terrorist partners over in Lebanon to give us back our American hostages that were in Lebanon. Okay, 7 hostages were, the public was told there were 7 hostages that we would then get in return officially. We're justifying this shipment of arms for 7 U.S. hostages that were being held in Lebanon by Hezbollah. Oh, all of the same characters are coming into the story that we're dealing with right now. So except it turned out they kind of maybe lied about that. Another hostage scenario. We could go down a lot of rabbit holes with this. But what was discovered actually was what they were really doing was just trying to get the American public on the side for a deal for Israel. In reality, they were going to send that shipment to Iran on behalf of Israel because Israel wanted to arm and train militants that were in Nicaragua. So, you know, by way of deception, thou wilt make war, right? We're going to get really deceptive. They deceived the American public. They wanted the American weapons sent. And then when it came time to hide the transaction, so Iran's going to give them cash. Iran was going to give cash for weapons. And they weren't going to give that cash directly to Iran, directly to Israel, pardon me. Instead, Iran was going to give that money to Russia. Essentially, this is like they're going to launder the cash they get for the weapons through Russia so that they could get it to arm and train militants in Nicaragua. And you know who helped facilitate that? The whole Russia through Robert Maxwell, of course. According to Ari Ben-Menashe, who was a part of the Iran-Contra scandal and went to prison for it, Robert Maxwell was the person who brokered the lucrative deal between the Mossad and the KGB that allowed the Israelis to hide money from the arms sales to Iran. And Ari Ben-Menashe says that Robert Maxwell wanted to involve Epstein in this operation. Ari Ben-Menashe says, quote, what happened was Maxwell introduced Epstein to us. He wanted us to accept him into our group. But despite Maxwell's insistence, Ben-Menashe claims that Epstein just wasn't competent and he wasn't accepted by them. He wasn't accepted by him. He wasn't accepted by Nick Davies, who at that time was the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror. He was also involved in this operation. Man, Daily Mirror is just a whole operation going on there. And so, yeah, they just weren't impressed with him. Nevertheless, Ari Ben-Menashe says that Epstein was, in fact, able to develop close ties with several arms dealers. Again, this was in the 80s. So you can dispel the new media story about him having met Ghislaine in the 90s and then be forming a friendship and nothing at all to do with the Mossad. That's just a lie. It is a lie. And he's able to fashion those relationships, those arm deals relationships since the 80s, particularly with a guy named a British man named Sir Douglas Leese, who was involved in a series of contracts that were known, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, as the Al Yamama deal. Now, we're going to stop there because that's then going to bring in Saudi Arabia. It's going to bring in Adnan Khashoggi. Remember Jamal Khashoggi, just a journalist, all that stuff. Yeah, a little bit more going on there. I don't think he was maybe just a journalist. Certainly Adnan Khashoggi, his father, was in the mix. A lot of players are in the mix. Gosh, we've got already Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, Israel, America, the UK, France. Are you guys starting to understand? We've got Lebanon being told about hostages. You guys starting to understand why they don't want anybody touching the Epstein files? Because the blow up is not just going to have to do with America and American politicians. It is a very, very, very sophisticated network. And by the way, what Trump is saying about it right now, which I'm going to show you after we throw it to our sponsors for a little bit, what he tweeted this morning, yeah, it is looking like some people behind him might be terrified. First, I'm going to tell you guys about Tax Network USA. Tax Network USA proudly believes in freedom, resilience, and financial independence. To mark the occasion, they're offering 10% off all services for a limited time. So if you're dealing with back taxes or you missed the April 15th deadline, don't wait because the IRS is stepping up enforcements fast. Penalties can add up quickly, so up to 5% per month, and they max out sometimes at 25% off your total tax bill just for not filing. That's on top of what you already owe, but there is good news because Tax Network USA can still help you turn things around. Whether you're self-employed, run a business, or even if your books are a complete mess, their team knows how to cut through the chaos and find solutions that work. Your consultation will be completely free, and you'll be able to get ahead of the problem now. It can help you avoid harsh penalties, wage garnishments, or surprise bank levies. Take the first step, Take the first step, call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Candace. You may have missed the tax deadline, but you haven't run out of options. So let Tax Network USA help. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Candace. Also reminding you guys about Nimi Skincare because your skincare routine should work for you. That's why I want to introduce you guys to Nimi Skincare because with their custom skincare bundle builder, you can create a routine that's not only tailored to your skin's unique needs, but also rooted in the values that matter most: faith, family, and freedom. You get to handpick the products that match your goals, whether that's hydration, anti-aging, or bringing out your natural God-given glow. You can build a routine that's simple, effective, and that's made right here in the USA. And when you subscribe to your custom bundle, the savings adds up. Right now, you'll get 10% off 2 products, 15% off 3 products, and up to 20% off 5 products or more. One-time orders don't qualify for these discounts. So subscribing is truly the smartest way to care for your skin without ever running out of what you need. So if you're tired of giving your money to companies that don't share our values, Nimi is your answer. They're conservative owned. All their products are made in the USA with clinically proven ingredients. When you choose Nimi, you vote with your wallet. So stop compromising on your skincare routine. Build your custom bundle today by visiting nimiskincare.com and be sure to subscribe for ultimate convenience and savings. Again, you can use my code Candace5 and you'll get an additional 5% off that first subscription order. nimiskincare.com, promo code Candace5. All right, you guys. So that's a lot. The beginning of this story definitely is starting to sound like a web. Definitely starting to seem like a lot of people are cluing into the fact that maybe there is a global government. Jeffrey Epstein, by the way, was very open and clear about his aims to help facilitate a global government. We'll get to that tomorrow, as his story is just incredible. I want to show you this. Trump tweets this today, calling Jeffrey Epstein a Democrat hoax. Did all that? Maybe everything I just shared sounded like a Democrat hoax to you. He wrote on Truth Social, the radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again. Just like with the fake and fully discredited Steele dossier, the lying from the intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia. No, it came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. And even the Russia scam itself, totally fake and made up story used in order to hide crooked Hillary Clinton's big loss in the 2016 presidential election. These scams and hoaxes are all the Democrats are good at. It's all they have. They are no good at governing, no good at policy, and no good at picking winning candidates. Also, unlike Republicans, they stick together like glue. Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit, hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will. Even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years, I've had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history. And all these people want to talk about with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems is a Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. don't even think about talking about our incredible and unprecedented success because I don't want their support anymore. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. A lot going on there. He doesn't want the support of anybody who wants to know more about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. That's a pretty big statement. Calling it a Democrat hoax, as we uncovered a couple of days ago, you know, he was arrested during the time when Trump was in power in 2019, that second time. Rather, I think the first time he was arrested back in 2007, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Skylar, was it George Bush was president? Yep, that's correct. And so it doesn't really seem like that might have been a Democrat hoax, given the fact that these were federal charges and Republicans would have been in charge. And also, I think people from both sides are calling for this. It's not just Republicans or just Democrats that want these files. It's like the first time everyone is together on this. And it's interesting to say, like, we should move on from Jeffrey Epstein in a post where you are also throwing it back to all of these other hoaxes, right? So we get to keep talking about the laptop. We get to keep talking about the Russia hoax, which we fully agree were hoaxes. That's why we were behind you as your supporters saying these are hoaxes. There is no fire here. There's not even any smoke here. And we followed you. We are that same base of people that have the wherewithal to know when we are looking at a hoax and when we are looking at something that is deeply sinister. You can't just edit our ability to see that. Okay. We were clever enough to perceive a hoax then, and we're clever enough to perceive what is clearly not a hoax now. That's what I would say. That's what I would offer back. But Mr. Trump, Mr. President Trump, respectfully, if you'd ever like to come on my podcast, last time we spoke, I'd welcome you to explain in long format how you perceive this to be a hoax and who particularly you see as facilitating this hoax. I also invite you to, blink twice. You've got some Zionists that are behind you that are making you real nervous to talk about this. Blink twice. Anyways, Rep. Thomas Massey is one such Republican who is basically saying, nope, we're not getting away with this. You guys are not getting away with that. He has launched a long shot attempt to force a vote on the releasing of the Epstein files. He announced this on X that he is going to force a vote on this. And if nothing else, we will at least know who is voting against the release of the Epstein files. Here's what he shared on X. He wrote, "We all deserve to know what's in the Epstein files, who is implicated, and how deep this corruption goes. Americans were promised justice and transparency. So we're introducing a discharge petition to force a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives on releasing the complete files." You can see that already has 11,000 retweets. He then explains a discharge petition is a procedural tool for bypassing leadership. In 7 days, we can start collecting signatures. At 218 signatures, the House must vote on our bill requiring a full release of the Epstein files. If your representative will not sign the discharge petition, ask why. So certainly do that, guys. We'll keep you posted on that. I will when he gets his petition going for signatures, I will get that up and make sure that I'm promoting it because this matters. Like I've said, this matters. All right, you guys, I'm going to get into some of your comments. First, I want to tell you guys a new shot.
Go for you. Follow me.